We turn our attention to New York City during the first solar flares. New York City, on the last day before a school holiday, is beginning its journey home beneath an ordinary sky. In the subway below the streets, Mark and Trina feel the power fail, and within moments the first solar flares have turned the familiar city into the opening scene of a much larger catastrophe. On 14 August 2012, beneath the streets of New York City, Mark sits beside Trina as the evening train carries them home through the darkness. You are standing with them in the crowded carriage, where the windows show only trembling reflections of tired faces and the occasional spark of tunnel light. Mark is 17, with schoolbooks resting against his knees, while Trina, his neighbor and schoolmate, leans quietly against the metal pole beside him. They have traveled together many times along the familiar subway route beneath New York, and nothing in the carriage suggests that this journey will be remembered for the rest of their lives. The train gives a sudden shudder. The lights vanish. For a moment, the darkness is complete. No one moves because the silence is too strange. The machinery beneath the floor has stopped. The wheels have ceased their iron complaint, and even the air seems to have withdrawn from the carriage. Mark hears Trina breathing close beside him. Somewhere farther along the train, a child begins to cry. The emergency lights awaken in a weak red line above the doors, then flicker unevenly. Their color makes the passengers seem pale and unfamiliar. A man strikes the nearest window with his palm, as though the glass might explain what has happened. Another voice asks whether the train has lost power. Someone answers that it must be temporary. Mark does not know that the world above has already begun to change. The underground carriage settles into a heavy, motionless quiet. You feel the warmth trapped between the passengers, the sour trace of old air, and the hard edge of the seat beneath your hand. The tunnel beyond the doors smells of hot metal and concrete dust, with a faint thread of smoke entering through the seams. One emergency lamp after another fades along the train. The red glow retreats into darkness. The passengers press towards the doors, though nobody yet understands where they will lead. Shoes scrape across the floor, bags knock against knees. A woman says that she cannot breathe. The child continues to cry, and the sound travels strangely through the motionless carriage. Mark looks towards Trina. She is still calm, but her face has changed. Above them, New York is being struck by the first solar flares. Their radiation has crossed the distance from the sun with unimaginable force, and energy surges through systems that were never designed to withstand it. Technology fails in widening circles. Power stations collapse. Communications vanish. Engines stop. Screens go black. Systems that have supported ordinary life for generations become useless within moments. Mark knows none of this. He knows only that the train is dead. The tunnel holds the warmth like a sealed stone passage beneath a furnace. A thin haze moves through the carriage, turning the red emergency lights into blurred stains. The metal doors tick as they cool, and the rails give occasional small sounds beneath the floor. Far above, a hard glare spreads over the city. It is not the soft brightness of morning, nor the golden light of a late summer evening. It is an unnatural radiance that erases shadows and makes familiar buildings appear flat and distant. Windows reflect it. Streets shine beneath it. The towers of New York stand in that glare while their electrical systems fail one by one. Inside the train, Mark hears the first blows against the doors. A passenger has found the manual release. The doors open by degrees, revealing the narrow ledge beside the track. The darkness beyond is broken by weak lamps fixed to the tunnel wall. A few still burn. Most are already fading. The people nearest the opening climb down, placing their feet carefully on the dusty concrete. Trina takes Mark's arm. They leave the train together. The tunnel air meets you with a dry, metallic heat. It carries the scent of smoke, old stone, and something sharper that you cannot identify at first. The emergency lamps recede into a dim chain behind you, while ahead, the passage bends into blackness. People move without direction. Some call for relatives. Others shout that the train will start again. A man runs along the track and disappears around the curve. A woman kneels beside someone who has fallen, touching his face, as though sleep might explain the stillness. Mark hears a deep vibration through the rails. It is not the train. The sound comes from somewhere distant, low and irregular, like enormous machinery turning beneath the city. Then the vibration stops. The silence that follows feels heavier than before. The first bodies lie farther along the tunnel. Mark sees them before Trina does. They're scattered beside the wall, among dropped bags and broken pieces of equipment. Some have been burned. Others are motionless beneath a fine covering of dust. The air around them is hot enough to make Mark's eyes sting. Trina makes a small sound. You are close to her when the tunnel fills with sudden movement. People push past, stumbling over the tracks and brushing against the walls. A man carries a bleeding girl against his chest. Another passenger has torn his shirt into strips and is trying to bind an arm. Nobody offers an explanation. There is no official voice in the darkness, no orderly instruction, and no functioning authority to tell the passengers what has happened. There is only confusion, heat, smoke, and the instinct to move away from the powerless train. Mark grips Trina's hand. They begin walking. The concrete walls sweat beneath the unnatural warmth. Fine dust gathers on your shoes and settles across your sleeves. Somewhere behind you, metal groans inside the dead train, followed by a brittle cracking sound. The tunnel lamps fail in sections. Each extinguished light leaves a deeper pocket of blackness. Mark and Trina move with the others, though the crowd has begun to break apart. Some people turn back towards the stations. Others continue forward, hoping that another exit lies nearby. The rails are uneven beneath their feet, and the sleepers seem to shift whenever the distant vibration returns. The darkness is interrupted by a man carrying a heavy length of metal. He is broad-shouldered, grey-haired, and moving with a deliberate steadiness that seems almost impossible in the panic. His clothes are torn, and one side of his face is streaked with blood. He stops when he sees Mark and Trina, not because he recognizes them, but because he understands that they will not reach the surface alone. His name is Alec. Alec is a former soldier. He does not speak like a commander addressing an army, and he does not claim to understand the disaster. He studies the tunnel, the people, and the smoke, then gives short instructions in a voice that carries through the confusion. Stay close. Step where he steps. Do not touch the rails. Mark obeys because Alec sounds certain about the next few feet, even if he knows nothing about the miles beyond them. Trina follows beside him, coughing into her sleeve. Alec leads them away from the thickest part of the crowd and towards a maintenance passage cut into the wall. You hear Alec's boots strike the concrete in a measured rhythm. The sound gives the tunnel a temporary order. Hot air moves through the passage behind him, bringing smoke and the dry taste of dust. Every few moments, a distant cry rises and falls. The passage narrows. Alec forces open a service gate with his shoulder, then holds it while Mark and Trina pass through. Beyond the gate, a staircase climbs steeply towards the surface. Its walls are marked with old paint and dark handprints. A weak yellow lamp burns near the bottom, trembling each time the unseen vibration passes beneath the ground. Another figure waits above. She is carrying a medical bag. Her name is Lana, and she knows Alec from his former military service. She was once a military nurse, and the discipline of that life remains in the way she examines injuries before faces. Her hair is tied back. Her hands are steady. When Mark reaches the landing, Lana checks his eyes, his arms, and the blood on his shirt. The blood is not his. Lana asks whether Trina can walk. Trina nods. Alec turns towards the stairwell and listens. For several seconds, nobody speaks. The silence is broken by a distant roar somewhere beyond the concrete walls. Dust falls from the ceiling. Lana closes her medical bag. Alec tells them that the upper streets may be worse than the tunnels. But the stairwell is no longer safe either. You are enclosed between the walls, with warmth pressing against your skin and the taste of smoke lingering beneath your tongue. Lana's medical bag brushes your knee as she passes. The leather is cracked and soft from use. Above the stairwell, white light leaks through a damaged doorway. It is brighter than daylight and colder in appearance, a blank glare that makes the dust seem silver. Mark shields his eyes with one hand. Trina turns her face away. Alec climbs first, pausing at each landing to inspect the next section. At street level, New York no longer behaves normally. The entrance opens beside a row of shops whose windows have burst outward. Cars stand in the road at impossible angles, their engines silent and their doors hanging open. Traffic signals show no color. A bus has struck the side of a building. Smoke rises from several streets at once. Sirens sound in the distance. One begins near the river, another farther uptown, and a third somewhere behind the buildings. Their voices overlap briefly, then separate. As the minutes pass, the sirens become intermittent. Some stop abruptly. Others fade into the broad, unnatural brightness. Mark looks towards the skyline. The city he knows is still there, but its familiar order has disappeared. Telephone wires hang loose. Shop signs flicker without meaning. A line of people stands outside a pharmacy, staring through its dark windows. Farther away, a tower emits a shower of sparks before becoming still. The flares have destroyed or disabled much of the world's technology, though Mark understands this only through the objects failing around him. He sees the effects before he has words for them. Radios hiss. Phones show empty screens. Cars refuse to start. Elevators stop between floors. New York has been struck directly by the disaster. The sun's violence has reached the streets. Heat lies over the pavement in wavering layers. You feel it rising through the soles of your shoes, while the air above the road tastes of ash and electrical smoke. Glass glitters around the broken shop fronts. A torn awning lifts and settles in the faint wind. Alec moves them through side streets. He chooses routes by instinct, avoiding crowds and places where buildings have begun to burn. Lana stays near Trina, watching for shock, burns, and signs of smoke inhalation. Mark walks between them, turning repeatedly towards the subway entrance they have left behind. The entrance is already hidden by a crowd. People spill into the street, some limping, some carrying the injured, and some standing beneath the white glare without moving at all. The first catastrophe has caught them underground, on bridges, in offices, and in apartments. Many of the people caught in New York will die during the disaster. Mark does not know that yet. He knows that the city is too quiet. He knows that the bodies in the tunnel were not an isolated accident. They pass a police car with its doors open and its lights dark. A uniformed officer lies beside the curb, while another stands nearby holding a useless radio. The officer speaks into it again and again, but no answer comes through. Lana tells Mark to keep walking. The pavement has become warm enough to soften old tar between the stones. You smell burning rubber, hot brick, and the bitter odor of wiring stripped open by the flare. Above the rooftops, the white radiance remains fixed and merciless. Alec leads them towards higher ground. The streets slope gradually upward, and the buildings become older, narrower, and more closely packed. People emerge from doorways with blankets, bottles, and frightened animals. Nobody seems to know where safety lies. Rumors travel faster than facts. The sun has exploded. The power grid will return soon. The army is coming. The river is rising. Every statement is spoken with equal confidence and equal uncertainty. Mark begins to understand that the catastrophe is not merely local. The dead systems around him are connected to distant places. A radio in a shop window gives a broken fragment of a voice from another state, followed by static. Someone says that Europe has gone dark. Someone else says that the entire sky is burning. Alec does not repeat the rumors. He says that they must reach the Lincoln building. The Lincoln Building stands higher than the surrounding streets, with thick foundations and enough interior space to shelter survivors. It is not a government center or a military command post. It is simply a strong building, and in a city without functioning systems, strength has become valuable. They continue upward. The streets hold an uneasy brightness. You see drifting ash caught in the light, turning slowly above the pavement. A cracked window taps against its frame. Somewhere nearby, water runs through a broken pipe and gathers in the gutter. The sound is almost peaceful. Then the ground trembles. Alex stops and raises one hand. The vibration comes again, stronger now, traveling through the buildings and the road beneath them. Dust falls from a brick cornice. A parked car rocks gently on its springs. People look towards the river. Mark cannot see the water from where he stands. He can hear it. The noise begins as a distant rumble, broad and continuous, with a rolling force unlike traffic or thunder. It grows beneath the scattered sounds of the city. The vibration returns through the soles of your feet, then climbs into your knees and chest. The first wave has not yet arrived. The flares have caused rumors of melted polar ice and a tsunami moving towards the coast. The knowledge reaches Mark in fragments, carried by strangers and broken radios. He does not understand the scale of it. He imagines an ordinary wave, cold and blue, rising along the river. Alec tells him that the water will be dangerously hot. The warning seems impossible. It is not an ordinary cold water wave from a distant storm. The surge has been intensified by forces no one around them can explain, and the energy moving through the ocean has transformed it into something far more destructive. The water approaching New York carries heat, force, and the weight of a changing planet. Lana pulls Trina closer. The Lincoln Building rises ahead through the glare, its upper windows reflecting a pale sky. People crowd around the entrances. Some are trying to force the doors. Others are carrying injured friends through broken glass. The heavy vibration grows louder. You stand among strangers who have forgotten to speak. Their faces are grey beneath the white light. Dust clings to their hair and eyebrows. The air trembles with the approach of water. Alec reaches the building first. He finds a service entrance on the western side, where a damaged security door has been pushed inward. The stairwell beyond is dark, but it offers a route upwards. Lana helps an elderly man across the threshold. Mark takes Trina's hand again and follows Alec into the building. Inside, the air is cooler. It smells of plaster, old carpet, and spilled water. The darkness has a softer quality than the tunnel, though the building groans whenever the distant surge strikes another part of the city. Emergency lights glow along the stairwell, giving each landing a dull amber edge. The survivors climb. Some carry supplies. Some carry children. Some carry nothing except the clothes they are wearing. Behind you, the entrance fills with more people, and their footsteps rise through the stairwell like a slow, uneven tide. Mark looks through a broken window. New York is changing below. The streets nearest the river have disappeared beneath a broad sheet of water. Cars drift between buildings. Pieces of wood and metal turn in the current. A plume of steam rises where the surge strikes the heated pavement. The wave reaches higher. It moves through the city without behaving like water in any familiar sense. It folds around buildings, pours through streets, and lifts entire vehicles against walls. The surface is dark in places and pale in others, reflecting the white glare from above. Mark understands then that the disaster has crossed the boundaries of his own life. The subway was only the beginning. The flares did not strike one train, one neighborhood, or one city. They traveled across the earth, destroying technology and killing people wherever their force reached. New York has been struck directly, but it is not alone. Alec tells everyone to keep climbing. He does not say that the building will hold. He does not say that the wave has finished rising. The stairwell becomes close and crowded. You feel damp fabric against your arm and the rough wall beneath your fingertips. Breathing grows louder around you. A child sleeps against a woman's shoulder despite the noise. Another tremor passes through the building. The lights flicker. For a moment, the stairwell is illuminated by a white flash from outside. Every face appears sharply defined, then vanishes into amber darkness. Somewhere below, glass breaks in a long cascade. Lana checks the people gathered on the landing. Her military training has taught her to separate urgent injuries from survivable ones, although the distinction feels cruel in the crowded stairwell. She binds a man's hand with a strip of cloth. She gives water to a girl with burns along one cheek. Alec carries a wounded stranger up 2 flights without speaking. Mark watches them work. He notices that Alec never looks towards the city for long. He keeps his attention on doors, staircases, structural cracks, and possible routes of escape. Lana does the same, measuring the condition of each person while listening for changes in the building. Neither of them pretends to possess an answer. That honesty steadies Mark more than reassurance would have done. The Lincoln building groans around you, a deep complaint moving through the concrete. Water strikes somewhere below with a muffled impact. The smell of hot moisture rises through the stairwell, mingling with smoke and dust. On a higher floor, the survivors find offices with shattered windows and overturned desks. Alec chooses rooms on the inner side of the building, away from the exposed walls. Lana closes doors where she can and arranges people along the corridors. The city outside is almost silent now. The sirens have stopped. Only distant fires provide movement, their orange light wavering against the unnatural whiteness. Far below, the water continues to spread through New York, filling avenues and lower rooms. Most of the people caught in the city have no refuge above the rising level. Mark sits on the floor beside Trina. They are still neighbors and schoolmates, but school and home now belong to a world that feels impossibly distant. His books are gone. Trina's coat is torn. Dust covers both of them. Alex stands at a broken window. Lana rests her medical bag beside the wall. No one knows how long the night will last. The first day returns to Mark in fragments, each one separate from the next. The dead train, the red emergency lights, the heat in the tunnel, Trina's hand closing around his, Alec opening the service gate, Lana's careful examination, the white glare over New York. These memories will return throughout his life. They will come without warning, sometimes in darkness and sometimes beneath ordinary daylight. Mark will remember the powerless subway and the bodies among the tracks. He will remember how the city waited for the wave, listening to its approach through stone. For now, he is too tired to understand what memory means. Night settles slowly over the damaged refuge. The white light outside weakens at last, becoming grey across the flooded streets. In the rooms of the Lincoln building, survivors whisper names, share small amounts of water, and lie close together on the floor. You are near a broken window. The glass has been swept away, leaving a jagged frame. Cooler air enters through the opening, carrying the smell of wet concrete and distant smoke. The building trembles beneath you, but the movement is gentler now. Alec lowers himself against the wall. Lana folds a blanket over Trina's shoulders. Mark keeps looking towards the dark city. The water below reflects a few scattered fires. The light trembles on the surface, then breaks apart. A loose sign turns slowly in the flooded street. The Lincoln building remains standing. The stairs are quiet. The lamps are dim. Mark closes his eyes, though sleep does not come immediately. The first day lies behind him, bright and burning, without an ending he can yet understand. Outside, the water moves through New York. Inside, the survivors breathe softly. The damaged building holds them in its darkness. And beyond the broken windows, beneath an unusual sun, the ordinary world waits for morning. The morning arrives without a clear boundary, because smoke has softened the daylight and the flooded streets reflect a colorless sky. You are standing near the eastern windows of the Lincoln building, where water moves slowly between abandoned cars and broken shop fronts. The towers beyond appear softened by vapor, their upper floors pale against the unusual sun. Damp concrete cools the soles of your shoes. while the odor of stale food lingers beneath the sharper smells of mud, salt water, and distant smoke. Somewhere below, a loose door knocks at measured intervals, though nobody goes to investigate. The stairs remain quiet, and the lamps have become weak yellow circles upon the walls. Around you, survivors sleep in coats and blankets, arranged beside cases of tinned food, bottled water, and whatever possessions they carried from their homes. The damaged building holds its silence as carefully as it holds the people within it. Mark closes his eyes during the brighter hours, though sleep seldom reaches him for long. Trina sits beside him whenever the corridors become crowded, her shoulder touching his, while Lana measures water and examines the injured beneath the dim emergency lamps. Alec moves through the building with the steady attention of someone accustomed to danger, checking doors, stairwells, windows, and dwindling supplies. Other survivors organize themselves around these small acts of order, carrying boxes, rationing fuel, clearing glass, and listening for movement outside. The first day becomes a collection of separate memories, each bright, painful, and incomplete. Nobody possesses a reliable account of what happened beyond New York, and nobody can say whether the catastrophe affected one city, one country, or much of the world. No precise calendar date is given for the solar flare catastrophe, leaving its beginning suspended within personal recollections rather than an official chronology. Mark remembers the light, Trina remembers the streets, and Alec remembers the sudden failure of everything that had seemed permanent. A grey residue settles upon the window ledges, fine as flour and slightly gritty beneath your fingertips. When you lean near the broken glass, cold air enters with the scent of wet stone and distant burning. The city no longer has its familiar layers of sound, because engines, horns, trains, lifts, and voices have fallen away from the morning. Water laps against masonry far below, producing a soft, repetitive movement beneath the occasional groan of weakened metal. In the corridors, blankets have been spread over concrete, and the fabric carries traces of dust, rain, and human warmth. A tin cup rests beside a stairwell, its rim darkened by repeated use. The stale smell of stored food gathers around the rooms where supplies are kept, mingling with damp concrete and the faint medicinal odor of Lana's bandages. Light passes through smoke in long, dull bars, touching faces, walls, and the edges of unopened tins. The first days pass according to need rather than the clock. Mark records the remaining food on scraps of paper, dividing each case into portions that can be counted without argument. Trina helps him carry the figures from room to room, and their quiet conversations become a point of steadiness for those sleeping nearby. Lana establishes a small treatment area beside a service corridor, using boiled water, torn clothing, and the contents of abandoned first aid boxes. Alec selects 2 survivors for each night watch, explaining that fear becomes less dangerous when given a schedule. Military experience has made him familiar with improvised leadership, although he never claims authority in formal words. His previous service also makes him one of the group's principal protectors, particularly when frightened strangers arrive at the building's lower entrances. The survivors rely upon stored food, practical decisions, and fragments of training, because public authority has vanished from the streets. Beyond the Lincoln building, the absence of instructions becomes almost as frightening as the absence of rescue. Rain gathers upon the outer walls and slides down the glass in crooked paths. You hear it striking the metal frames with a sound like handfuls of small stones, while water continues to move through the lower avenues. The building smells of wet clothing, rust, old plaster, and food opened too quickly. In the stairwell, the concrete has taken on a dark sheen, and each landing seems deeper than the one above it. The surviving lamps flicker whenever someone starts a generator, causing shadows to swell and withdraw along the walls. Trina's voice remains low beside the ration tables, carrying a warmth that does not depend upon the failing electricity. Mark's papers lift slightly in the draft whenever a door opens. At night, the city becomes almost completely still, except for the slow movement of water and the distant collapse of structures weakened by heat and flooding. You stand among the sleeping figures and feel the building breathe through its pipes. A week becomes 2, and the amount of food diminishes with an inevitability that nobody can prevent. Some survivors begin to speak about leaving, though no route appears safe, and no destination possesses dependable shelter. Roads may be blocked, bridges may have fallen, and every vehicle outside has become either useless or abandoned. The few radio sets still operating provide only fragments, often dissolving into static before a place name can be understood. Reports of fires, flooding, and power failures emerge without sequence, while other transmissions contain nothing except voices calling for relatives. The survivors have little reliable information about events outside New York, and the uncertainty encourages stories that grow more dramatic each evening. Mark prefers the plain records of what can be seen, while Trina listens for the emotional meaning hidden within each broken transmission. Lana warns against wasting medical supplies on panic, and Alec continues to patrol the lower floors. Weeks remain inside the Lincoln building, while certainty diminishes beside the food. A thin film of moisture covers the walls near the basement, and the air there tastes of minerals and old dust. You carry a crate along the corridor, feeling the wood rough beneath your palms and the weight shift whenever the floor slopes. The stored provisions give off a dense smell of flour, oil, preserved meat, and cardboard softened by dampness. Beyond the entrance, floodwater reflects the broken sky, carrying leaves, paper, and fragments of furniture through the streets. Smoke drifts low over the surface, making the distant buildings appear like dark islands. Somewhere above, a person coughs, and another survivor murmurs a name in sleep. The sound fades into the broad hush that has replaced the city's former noise. Even footsteps seem cautious, as though the concrete itself might object to unnecessary movement. You return the crate to its place, and the shelves stand in orderly rows against the walls, holding the last visible shape of security. One afternoon, a sound rises from the waterfront that does not belong to the altered city. At first, the survivors mistake it for machinery shifting beneath the flood, but then a horn sounds through the smoke. Alec reaches the windows before anyone else, and Mark follows him to the highest side of the building where the harbor can still be seen. A yacht moves between submerged avenues, its white hull streaked with soot, and its upper deck crowded with figures. The vessel approaches slowly, pushing aside floating timber and tangled cables, while its engine produces a low, uneven vibration. For several minutes, the sight resembles rescue, and the building fills with movement as people gather coats, water, and questions. Trina grips Mark's hand near the window, while Lana prepares a medical bag in case the crew can carry the injured away. The yacht eventually reaches the survivors, bringing the first unmistakable sign of organized movement since the catastrophe. Hope enters the Lincoln building quietly, before anyone has tested its weight. Sunlight breaks through the smoke and strikes the yacht's rail in a pale line. You can see ropes hanging over the side, their fibers darkened by seawater and oil. The air near the windows changes as the vessel approaches, carrying salt water, diesel, wet timber, and a harsher smell of smoke. Its deck rises and falls among the flooded streets, though the water remains strangely calm beneath the drifting debris. Men stand near the bow with weapons, their clothing layered against the damp wind, and their faces unreadable from a distance. Behind them, coiled lines and metal fittings glisten with moisture. The yacht's polished surfaces have been dulled by ash, and dark stains mark the places where hands have held the rail. You hear the engine laboring below the horn, each vibration passing through the water and into the lower walls of the building. The survivors wait beside the windows, surrounded by stale provisions and damp concrete, while the vessel turns its bow toward the entrance. The crew does not begin with an offer of passage. Instead, armed men enter the lower floors and order the survivors away from the stairwell, speaking with the confidence of people who expect obedience. Their leader explains that the yacht carries limited supplies and that the Lincoln building contains more food than the crew can afford to ignore. The survivors are herded into a broad office where broken desks have been pushed against the walls. Mark tries to speak about the injured and the children, but the crew demands access to every store of provisions. Trina remains close to him, and Lana keeps her medical bag beneath one arm while watching the captor's movements. Alec is separated from the others and placed near the doorway, where two men keep their weapons trained upon him. The yacht's crew takes the survivors hostage, turning the refuge into a bargaining site. Food, rather than rescue, becomes the center of the negotiation. Inside the office, the air feels close and warm despite the cold outside. You smell damp wool, metal, stale bread, and the sharp residue of diesel carried up from the waterfront. Rainwater drips from the crew's coats onto the concrete, forming small dark pools beneath their boots. One weapon rests against a desk, and its black surface catches the weak light whenever somebody moves. The windows are clouded by condensation, but the yacht's mast remains visible through the blurred glass. Ropes creak against the vessel's rail as the tide presses the hull against submerged stone. Smoke hangs beyond the building, turning the daylight into a brownish glow that settles upon every face. The survivors sit close together, their knees touching, while the captors stand apart with the stiff patience of men guarding cargo. A packet of dried food has been opened nearby, and its faint, sweet smell seems absurdly gentle within the tense room. Mark offers the crew a portion of the stored food, hoping that measured generosity might preserve the building's remaining people. The leader refuses and orders several men to search the upper floors, where they begin counting cases and breaking locks. Trina whispers that the supplies cannot support everyone indefinitely, yet surrendering them would leave the survivors without a reason for remaining alive. Lana studies the crew's injuries and notices that two men favor their legs, while another keeps one hand pressed against his ribs. Alec watches the room with a patience that appears almost passive. His military experience has taught him to observe routines, distances, habits, and moments of carelessness before attempting action. When one captor turns toward the corridor, Alec moves with sudden precision, striking the man's wrist and taking the weapon before the others understand what has changed. A second man falls against the desk, and the hostage arrangement begins to reverse within the space of several breaths. The office fills with the dry sounds of movement, cloth, and furniture scraping across the floor. You hear a chair topple, followed by the muted impact of a body against the wall. The smell of oil rises from the weapon, mingling with sweat and wet clothing. Mark draws Trina behind a heavy cabinet, while Lana moves two injured survivors toward the corridor. Alec's breathing remains controlled as he disarms the second captor and turns the weapon toward the doorway. Outside, the yacht's engine continues its uneven pulse, making the glass tremble inside its frame. A coil of rope swings beyond the window, knocking softly against the rail whenever the hull shifts. Water presses against the lower walls with a broad, hollow sound. In the confusion, voices overlap and then separate, some commanding, some pleading, and some reduced to frightened whispers. You remain close to the concrete floor, where dust, rainwater, and fragments of plaster gather in the narrow light. Alec does not pursue vengeance, because survival requires the yacht more than punishment. He orders the surviving crew members to lower their weapons and explains that the vessel will now carry the people they intended to rob. Several captors resist, but the balance of force has changed, and the survivors move behind Alec with tools, belts, and whatever improvised weapons they can find. Mark gathers the ration records and places them inside a waterproof case, while Trina collects blankets and medicine. Lana insists that the injured come aboard first, using her medical knowledge and survival experience to decide who can walk and who must be carried. The yacht's crew is bound and confined below deck, where their demands become distant beneath the engine noise. Within an hour, the survivors take control of the yacht, although nobody mistakes control for safety. The Lincoln building remains behind them, its stored food reduced to a final reserve, and its dark windows facing the flooded city. On the gangway, seawater splashes through gaps in the boards and darkens your trousers below the knee. The yacht smells of diesel, salt, wet rope, smoke, and old varnish warmed by the engine beneath the deck. Its rail is cold beneath your hands, roughened by grit and marked with dark stains from the harbor. The wind crosses the open water and lifts the smoke into torn grey ribbons. Behind you, the Lincoln building rises above the drowned street, its damaged windows holding small movements of people preparing to leave. The city's surface has become a broken geography of roofs, signs, wires, and drifting objects. Beneath the yacht, the water reflects fragments of towers and clouds in a trembling pattern. A rope creaks against the rail as the vessel pulls away, and the sound seems almost domestic amid the ruins. You step aboard with the others, carrying the quiet weight of the building's last weeks. Mark stands near the navigation console, while Alec studies the controls and the charts left by the crew. Neither man possesses a complete plan, yet both understand that remaining in New York would soon become impossible. Trina stays beside Mark, reading the old maps over his shoulder and marking possible routes away from the coast. Lana checks the injured in a narrow cabin, where shelves hold bandages, bottled water, and medicine affected by the heat. The survivors leave New York gradually, passing through channels formed by submerged streets and collapsed embankments. The yacht moves south and west whenever the waterways permit, while the coastline recedes into smoke and pale glare. No harbor authority answers their signals, and no patrol vessel appears through the haze. Their journey reflects the disappearance of normal transport and public authority, because movement now depends upon fuel, weather, local knowledge, and the strength of the people aboard. The yacht becomes a small traveling society, carrying its supplies and uncertainty beyond the drowned shore. Warm air rises from the engine compartment and spreads across the deck in slow waves. You smell fuel beneath the sharper salt of the open water, while smoke clings to your coat and settles upon the yacht's faded paint. The rail remains wet, and each rope gives a different note when the wind tightens it against the metal. Water moves past the hull with a dark gliding sound, broken by occasional pieces of timber striking and drifting away. At dusk, the sky turns copper near the horizon, though no one trusts the color of the sun anymore. The coastline appears altered by heat and flooding, with familiar roads ending in water and low buildings leaning beneath stained roofs. Birds circle without landing, their cries thin against the engine's persistent vibration. In the cabins, blankets dry slowly from their hooks, and the wooden walls retain the close smell of bodies, medicine, and damp clothing. The radio offers no dependable direction. Voices appear for a few seconds, naming towns, military installations, hospitals, and roads, before dissolving into static or silence. Some messages describe fires far inland, while others speak of water rising in districts that had never flooded before. The survivors hear references to scattered camps, blocked highways, and abandoned airports, yet no single authority seems able to confirm what remains. The catastrophe is remembered through personal flashbacks rather than a complete official chronology. Mark recalls the instant when the city's lights failed. Trina remembers a crowd moving beneath a burning sky, and Alec remembers a command structure collapsing within minutes. Lana remembers treating strangers in a stairwell, without knowing whether any hospital still functioned. These memories do not join into a national record because the institutions that might have assembled one have disappeared. The earliest post-catastrophe communities consist of scattered survivors rather than a stable national government. Night settles over the water without bringing the usual glow from the coastline. You see only isolated flames, reflections of fire upon flooded ground, and occasional lamps burning inside buildings with no visible occupants. The yacht's deck boards are cold beneath your feet, and salt has dried into pale crystals around the cleats. Diesel fumes move in layers, sometimes thinning beneath the wind and sometimes gathering near the stern. A lantern swings above the companionway, casting a small amber circle across the ropes and metal fittings. Below deck, the hull creaks with each change in the current, while restrained crew members remain silent behind a closed door. The water carries a smell of algae, smoke, and damaged timber. Mark and Trina speak softly near the bow, their figures outlined against the dark horizon. Their relationship has become part of the group's emotional center, providing quiet tenderness within the practical work of survival. The yacht travels for several days along uncertain waterways before reaching stretches where the coast offers no useful passage. Alec chooses a landing point near an inland road, and the survivors unload food, water, medicine, tools, and fuel into vehicles found near a deserted service station. Some cars start after patient work, while others remain silent with corroded terminals and flooded engines. The yacht is left secured within a sheltered inlet, its future uncertain beneath the changing tide. Nobody knows whether the crew will remain aboard, whether another group will find the vessel, or whether the waterway will soon become impassable. Mark counts the supplies again, and Trina writes the quantities upon a board taken from the station office. Lana distributes medicine according to need, while Alec places the strongest survivors at the front and rear of the traveling group. They begin moving towards the Appalachian region, where higher ground and smaller settlements may still allow life to be organized. Behind them, the coastline holds the drowned remains of New York. The road is cracked, buckled, and crowded with vehicles that have stopped wherever their drivers lost power. You walk between silent machines whose interiors smell of plastic, dust, and rain-soaked upholstery. Grass grows through the edges of the pavement, brushing your trousers with cool dampness as you pass. A traffic light hangs above an empty junction, frozen upon a color that no longer governs anything. Wind moves through the roadside trees, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant smoke. There is no traffic, no service station music, and no orderly line of travelers waiting for fuel. Glass glitters in the gutters, while paper notices cling to poles with their corners lifting in the breeze. Roads without traffic seem to contain more than ordinary silence, because every mile reveals another missing habit. Beyond the low fields, the land begins to rise, and the air loses the bitter odor of the city. The journey south and west becomes a slow inventory of missing institutions. At one town, the survivors pass a hospital with its doors open and its corridors empty. At another, they find a police station whose radio equipment has been stripped and whose records lie scattered across the floor. Fuel stations stand beneath faded signs, their pumps useless and their storage tanks inaccessible. Bridges remain intact in some places, yet no official worker guards them or explains which routes are safe. Mark preserves names and distances in a notebook, while Trina records the people encountered beside wells, farms, and school buildings. Alec negotiates passage through a settlement where armed families have placed furniture across the road. Lana treats burns and infections in exchange for grain, clean water, and directions. Their progress depends upon personal agreements rather than laws, schedules, or recognized offices. The missing institutions are visible everywhere, even when the buildings themselves remain standing. Late afternoon light rests upon the roadside in broad amber patches. You feel the warmth of the sun upon one side of your face and the coolness of shadow beneath the trees. The vehicles smell of dust, canvas, oil, and the faint sweetness of fruit preserved in glass jars. A creek passes beneath the road, its water clear over stones and carrying leaves beneath a low wooden bridge. No engine sounds rise from the valley, and the silence allows small details to become distinct. You hear a hinge moving upon an abandoned gate, the dry rustle of grass, and the soft clatter of tools inside a passing truck. Smoke remains visible behind the distant ridges, though its smell fades as the road climbs. The air has begun to change, losing the salt and diesel of the coast. You breathe through the open window and find the mountain wind cooler, cleaner, and edged with pine. Mark and Trina walk together whenever the road allows, sharing the responsibility of carrying the smallest packs. Their affection does not remove fear, yet it gives the group a form of continuity that cannot be measured in tins or liters. Mark still keeps the ration book, though its pages now contain names, symptoms, routes, and agreements with strangers. Trina remembers which survivors need reassurance, which families are grieving, and which children have stopped speaking since the first day. Lana's medical knowledge allows her to distinguish urgent illness from exhaustion, while her survival experience teaches her to conserve every useful material. Alec remains alert at the front of the column, selecting resting places with defensible approaches and access to water. The group does not travel as an army, a government, or a conventional household. It moves as a temporary community shaped by stored food, improvised leadership, military experience, and the need to remain together. The mountain evening arrives with a cooler breath moving through the trees. You hear insects gathering in the undergrowth, their sounds layered beneath the faint creak of leather straps and wooden wheels. The ground is soft with pine needles, and damp earth releases a dark mineral scent whenever a boot presses into it. A small fire burns behind a wall of stones, giving off smoke that clings to blankets and hair. The food is plain, warmed in dented pots, and eaten slowly because every portion remains part of tomorrow. Beyond the firelight, the forest becomes a mass of trunks, shadows, and scattered reflections upon wet leaves. The road behind you disappears into darkness, carrying no headlights or distant hum. Stars emerge above the ridge in greater number than they had near New York, though thin clouds continue to pass across them. The air feels spacious, and the group rests within its quiet without mistaking quiet for safety. As the survivors climb farther into the Appalachians, settlements become smaller and the roads less certain. They pass farms where people have gathered around wells, barns, and generators, forming communities without waiting for instructions from distant capitals. Some families offer shelter, while others close their gates and watch from porches with weapons nearby. News travels by word of mouth, changing slightly at every mile, but certain reports remain consistent. Coastal cities are flooded, transport has ceased, and no national command has restored its reach. The survivors hear that Asheville, North Carolina, lies among valleys where water and timber may still be available. The name is repeated around campfires, in notebooks, and beside roadside maps marked with pencil. Asheville becomes less a promise than a direction, a place where survival might still be organized. Their destination lies in the Appalachian region, away from the devastated New York coastline and the uncertainty of the drowned harbors. Morning mist gathers among the hills and rests upon the road like pale cloth. You walk through cool air carrying the scents of wet bark, pine resin, wood smoke, and dark soil. The last traces of salt water have disappeared from clothing, tools, and the spaces between the vehicles. Mountain streams move beside the road, their surfaces broken by stones and small branches washed down from higher ground. The sound of water is clearer here, no longer mixed with horns, engines, sirens, or the continual pressure of the city. Leaves touch one another overhead, producing a soft trembling that rises and fades with the wind. The road remains empty behind you, its curves concealed by mist and forest. Sunlight reaches the valley in narrow beams, illuminating suspended droplets and the pale edges of rocks. You feel the air entering your lungs with less smoke in it, while the hills hold their patient green silence around the traveling group. The approach to Asheville is not marked by an official gate or a welcoming procession. Instead, the survivors find scattered signs of settlement, including repaired fences, smoke rising from chimneys, and handwritten notices fixed to wooden posts. A group near an old schoolhouse directs them towards a valley where several families have begun sharing tools, food, and watch duties. The arrangement is fragile, yet it possesses the beginnings of order. Lana examines the available medical stores and finds enough material to establish a treatment room. Alex studies the surrounding slopes and suggests places for lookouts, storage, and protected gardens. Mark and Trina help count the remaining supplies, while their closeness reassures those who have grown exhausted by constant uncertainty. The group eventually settles near Asheville, North Carolina, bringing with them memories of the Lincoln Building, the seized yacht, and the drowned coast. No official chronology explains their world, but these shared experiences form a history they can carry. The valley holds a different kind of stillness from the flooded streets. You stand beside a rough wooden fence and feel mountain air moving across your face, cool beneath the afternoon sun. Nearby, a stream passes over rounded stones, creating a continuous sound that is gentle without being faint. Wood smoke rises from a chimney and bends towards the eastern ridge, where trees gather in overlapping shades of green. The soil is dark and damp, clinging to boots and the wheels of the surviving vehicles. A hammer strikes somewhere beyond the schoolhouse, followed by the measured scrape of a saw. No traffic passes along the road, and no distant city glow stains the evening sky. The smell of pine replaces salt water, diesel, and smoke from burning towers. Still, each quiet sound carries through the open land, and the survivors learn to distinguish work from warning. In the first weeks near Asheville, the survivors build routines from whatever remains available. Water is collected, food is divided, wounds are cleaned, and watch schedules are written upon boards. Mark continues to preserve names and dates, although the dates describe movement rather than the beginning of the catastrophe. Trina helps establish a common room where children sleep near the center of the settlement, protected by the presence of several families. Lana trains others to dress injuries, identify infection, and maintain cleanliness when medical supplies cannot be replaced. Alec teaches simple defensive procedures, drawing upon his previous service without allowing the settlement to become a military camp. Their leadership remains improvised because no government arrives to appoint officials or distribute resources. These early communities grow through scattered survivors making local decisions, each settlement separated from the next by damaged roads and uncertain news. In this new order, patience becomes practical, and memory becomes a form of equipment. Evening gathers beneath the trees, carrying the scent of leaves cooling after sunlight. You sit near the edge of the settlement, where the road slopes towards the darkening valley and the stream moves below. A lantern burns beside the schoolhouse door, its flame reflected in a metal basin filled with clean water. The walls smell of timber, dust, smoke, and the faint medicinal sharpness of boiled cloth. Somewhere nearby, a child turns pages in an old book, and the paper makes a delicate, dry sound. Tools rest against a post, their handles worn smooth by repeated work. Beyond the final fence, the hills become blue silhouettes beneath a sky gradually filled with stars. No engines approach, and no siren breaks the distance. The silence that followed the survivors inland feels less like abandonment and more like space in which a future may be assembled. The memory of New York remains present in every decision. Mark remembers how rapidly the city lost its systems, and he refuses to assume that any structure will function merely because it appears intact. Trina remembers the faces gathered within the Lincoln building, and she keeps the settlement attentive to people rather than supplies alone. Lana remembers treating injuries with inadequate tools, and she teaches prevention as carefully as treatment. Alec remembers the yacht's crew and the instant when fear became a weapon, so he prepares the settlement without encouraging suspicion towards every stranger. The survivors understand that a disaster can destroy institutions before it destroys buildings. They also understand that small communities can preserve fragments of order through shared labor, honest accounting, and watchful kindness. Asheville, North Carolina, therefore becomes more than a destination on a map. It becomes the place where the scattered survivors begin to imagine that society may be rebuilt from ordinary acts. Night settles across the Appalachian Valley, and the last warmth of the fire withdraws from the stones. You lie beneath a blanket that smells faintly of smoke, wool, and the clean dampness of mountain air. Through the open window, you hear the stream moving over its bed and the branches shifting above the roof. The settlement's lanterns diminish one by one, leaving only a few small lights near the watch posts. Far away, the hills conceal the coastline and the damaged towers of New York, though memory still carries their shapes. The Lincoln building remains behind you, standing within a flooded city, while the yacht rests somewhere beyond the altered shore. Mark and Trina sleep near the common room. Lana keeps her medicines arranged in careful rows, and Alec walks the outer path beneath the trees. The first reports of the flares remain incomplete, remembered through voices, flashes, and personal accounts. Within the darkness near Asheville, the survivors breathe softly, and the mountains hold them until morning. About 1 year after the solar flares, you are living near Asheville, North Carolina, where the mountains gather around a settlement made from patience, caution, and shared labor. Mark repairs the eastern fence, Trina keeps records beside the stove, and Alec carries timber from the edge of the forest. Lana arranges medicines in careful rows, while Toad and Misty tend the gardens below the slope. Darnell checks the water barrels and counts the remaining tins before evening. The work is modest, yet its repetition gives the days a shape that feels almost permanent. Around you, people mend clothing, preserve vegetables, and exchange quiet remarks beneath the broad Appalachian sky. Asheville lies beyond the wooded ridges, altered by absence and distance, while your smaller community remains hidden among the folds of the land. For a little while, the settlement resembles a village rather than a refuge, and the old world seems to have withdrawn without entirely disappearing. Morning light rests pale upon the roofs, where damp boards hold the coolness of the night. Smoke rises slowly from the chimney and bends towards the dark green shoulders of the mountains. Your boots press into a path softened by rain, and small stones turn beneath your weight as you cross between the cabins. Somewhere below, water passes over rock with a steady, silver murmur, while insects stir beneath the leaves. The air carries wood smoke, wet earth, and the faint sweetness of crushed grass. A kettle trembles over the fire, and metal tools lie warm beside the workshop wall. Uncollected fragments of the former world remain scattered in quiet places, including a child's red cup, a broken radio, and a suitcase without its handle. Nothing is hurried, because every useful object has acquired a second life, and every ordinary task must be completed with care. Above the trees, the sky remains empty, and the mountain wind moves gently through the branches. You are helping Mark lift a beam when a distant vibration begins to pass through the valley. At first, it resembles thunder concealed behind the ridges, but the sound grows too even and mechanical for weather. Alex stops beside you and turns towards the western slope, listening as the rotor noise rolls through the mountain valleys. Trina steps out from the common room with one hand raised against the brightness. Lana gathers the medicine boxes, while Toad and Darnell move towards the lower path. Then the first Borg appears above the trees, large and pale against the open sky, followed by another, and then another. The aircraft are broad enough to seem almost gentle from below, with rounded bodies and clean surfaces that recall rescue machines rather than instruments of war. Their arrival interrupts the fragile routine of the settlement, and the work beneath the Appalachian morning falls silent. Asheville, the hidden cabins, and the people among them become visible targets. The machines cast wide shadows across the clearing, and the brightness changes as each Borg passes before the sun. Rotor wash presses the grasses flat, lifting dust and leaves upwards in brown spirals that turn briefly through the air. Your face becomes dry beneath the moving wind, while loose cloth snaps against your arms and shoulders. Branches bow towards the ground, and the roofs creak as though the cabins themselves have begun to breathe. The scent of pine is broken by hot oil, scorched metal, and the metallic smell of spent ammunition. A flock of small birds bursts from the hillside, confused by the sudden violence of the sound. Fine grit gathers along your lips, and the clearing fills with fragments of leaf, bark, and pale dust. Through the shifting haze, the Borgs remain almost beautiful, their smooth shapes floating above the mountain settlement with a calmness that makes their presence more difficult to understand. The first gunfire comes without warning, striking the ground near the water barrels and throwing splinters from the fence. You run beside Mark towards the shelter of the workshop, while Alec pulls Toad behind a stone wall. Trina and Lana guide Misty down into the storage cellar, and Darnell shouts directions that vanish beneath the aircraft noise. The Borgs fire on the people below in short, controlled bursts, treating the settlement as though it were a mark on a map. Mark watches one aircraft dip lower than the others, its side hatch open above the clearing. Alex sees the same weakness, and both of you move through the trees while dust continues to rise behind you. The machine banks towards the southern ridge, perhaps expecting the people below to scatter. Instead, you and Alec reach the landing frame, climb through the open hatch, and pull yourselves into the dark interior before the Borg can regain height. Inside, the aircraft smells of fuel, canvas, and heated wiring. The floor vibrates beneath your palms, and the walls shiver whenever the rotors change their rhythm. Narrow lamps cast a greenish light over folded stretchers, sealed crates, and harnesses fixed along the bulkheads. Through a small side window, the settlement appears in broken glimpses, with the cabins shrinking beneath the turning blades. Spent cartridge casings roll against the metal floor, making a thin, irregular ringing that continues after the weapons fall silent. Your breath seems loud inside the enclosed compartment, and Alec's hand closes around a control lever while Mark searches for the pilot. The air feels close and bitter, carrying the dry taste of ammunition. Beyond the glass, Asheville's ridgelines slide past in layers of blue and grey. The aircraft is built to resemble assistance, yet every surface around you suggests a purpose that is colder and more deliberate. You find the pilot behind a reinforced partition, wearing a dark mask and a pale flight suit marked with no recognizable emblem. Alec forces the cockpit door open while Mark reaches for the controls, and the Borg begins to lose altitude over the forest. The pilot strikes at you with a metal tool, then turns towards a panel beneath the instrument lights. Mark catches his wrist, but the man twists free and pulls a lever marked in red. The aircraft jolts, and the rotors begin to lose their steady balance. Alec manages to bring one engine back into alignment, yet the Borg continues descending towards the trees. You secure the pilot with a strap, while Mark examines the controls, but the pilot is already staring through the windscreen at the rising forest. He understands that capture would lead to questions, and he chooses the mountain instead. The Borg's pilot crashes the aircraft to avoid interrogation, driving the nose through the upper branches. Pines scrape across the fuselage with a long, splintering sound, and the cabin, tilts sharply towards the forest floor. Your shoulder strikes the wall, while loose equipment breaks from its fittings and slides across the compartment. Alec braces himself against the cockpit frame, and Mark pulls the emergency harness over your chest. The world becomes a mixture of green branches, grey metal, and white bursts of mountain light. Fuel spills somewhere beneath the floor, releasing a sharp odor that mixes with the smell of crushed needles. When the Borg finally stops, silence arrives in uneven pieces, interrupted by ticking metal and the faint hiss of damaged valves. The damaged aircraft cools in the forest beneath a canopy of torn branches. You remain still until the last movement has passed, listening to small objects settle in the darkness. Outside, leaves drift down through the broken airframe, and a narrow stream continues its quiet course beyond the wreck. Mark and Alec survive the crash, although your body aches where the harness held you against the seat. The pilot is dead, and the cockpit has folded around him with a force that leaves no space for rescue. While searching the aircraft, you discover that the Borg is carrying ammunition in sealed cases beneath the rear deck. The boxes contain cartridges, but they also hold narrow glass ampoules packed in insulated compartments. Labels identify the contents only by numbers, warnings, and handling symbols, with no treatment instructions or useful explanation. Trina's medical knowledge is far away, and Lana's careful rows of medicines cannot reach you through the forest. Mark understands that the attack carried something more enduring than bullets, while Alec remains focused on finding a route home. The ammunition carried by the Borg contains a deadly virus, and the discovery changes the meaning of every shot fired above the settlement. You leave the pilot, the crates, and the cooling aircraft beneath the trees, carrying only water, weapons, and the knowledge that distance may no longer offer safety. The forest receives you with wet darkness beneath the branches. Needles soften your steps, but broken limbs catch at your clothing and leave resin along your fingers. A thin rain begins after midday, gathering on leaves before dropping in cold beads against your neck. The wreck remains behind you, unseen but not forgotten, its metal skin shrinking somewhere among the pines. Each breath tastes of damp bark and the faint bitterness of smoke drifting from the ruined engine. Alec walks ahead with a compass, while Mark follows the slope down towards a creek that should lead east. Water strikes the stones with a hollow, enclosed sound, and the valley walls seem closer beneath the low cloud. The route towards the settlement is difficult to measure, because the aircraft changed your sense of direction and the mountains conceal familiar landmarks. Nothing moves except insects, rainwater, and the occasional branch returning slowly to its place after you pass. You and Alec begin the return journey towards the settlement, while Mark keeps the damaged weapon close against his side. The first day passes without meeting another person, although you find footprints near an abandoned logging road and follow them only until the mud disappears. On the second morning, a distant rotor sound crosses the sky and fades before the Borgs can be seen. You remain beneath the trees until the valley becomes quiet again, wondering whether the aircraft are searching for the captured machine or for the people it attacked. Alec counts the hours since the crash, and Mark says very little about what lies in the sealed ammunition cases. The 3-day return journey becomes a wait for evidence of what the ammunition has done. Every abandoned house appears to contain an answer, yet every door opens only onto dust, old clothing, and furniture left where it stood. The mountains hold their silence around you, keeping the settlement hidden and the uncertainty intact. At night, you sleep beneath a rock shelf where rain gathers in a shallow basin. The stone is cold through your coat, and the scent of mineral water rises from the narrow hollow beside your hand. Wind moves along the ravine above you, producing a low tone that resembles distant machinery. Leaves collect against the shelter mouth and tremble whenever a stronger current passes down the slope. Mark's breathing remains shallow near the fireless darkness, while Alec turns occasionally to examine the trees. Your clothing carries the smell of mud, pine resin, and old smoke from the aircraft. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a night bird calls once and then remains silent. The darkness is not empty, because the forest contains countless small motions beneath its surface, yet none of them reveal what has happened near Asheville. You lie awake beside the men, feeling the hours pass through the chill stone while the virus waits beyond your knowledge. On the third day, you reach the outer road leading towards the settlement and recognize a fallen sycamore beside the creek. The familiar landmark gives you no comfort, because the path beyond it contains no voices, smoke, or movement. Mark calls once from the edge of the trees, but no one answers from the cabins. Alec raises his weapon and walks forward, while you follow between weeds that have grown across the old track. The gates stand open, and several tools remain scattered beside the workshop, as though their owners had expected to return after a brief interruption. You reach the settlement 3 days after the crash, finding the place altered beyond any ordinary account of absence. Most of the people you find there have been killed by the virus, while others are missing from their homes. Empty houses and uncollected belongings surround the common room, and the settlement seems to have been abandoned in the middle of a sentence. Asheville remains beyond the hills, but this smaller community has become a quiet map of loss. Dust lies across the tables, though the rooms have not been empty long enough for nature to reclaim them. A plate rests beside an untouched cup, and a coat hangs from a peg with rain-darkened sleeves. In the garden, bean vines have climbed their frames and continued flowering after the people who planted them were gone. Flies move behind the windows, where curtains stir gently in the warm afternoon air. The common room smells of cold ash, spoiled grain, and medicine left open beside a fallen chair. Outside, the wind carries the dry rustle of seed pods across the yard. There are no hurried footsteps, no kettle boiling, and no low conversations beneath the rafters. A child's blanket remains folded on a bed, while boots stand beneath another bed with mud hardened along their soles. The settlement offers the stillness of a place asleep, yet every detail shows that the silence has followed illness rather than rest. Trina and Lana are alive because they had remained apart from the crowded rooms, conserving supplies and treating whoever could still walk to them. You find them in a side cabin, with their notes spread across the floor and cloth masks tied over their faces. Lana reports that the illness does not follow one consistent course, and Trina confirms that patients have passed through different stages at different speeds. Some infected people survive for a period before becoming severely ill, while others weaken within hours of their first symptoms. The symptoms appear to change after the initial death, becoming less familiar as the days pass through the settlement. Neither woman can offer a diagnosis, because the isolation of the settlement makes medical diagnosis almost impossible. There is no laboratory, no reliable communication, and no physician able to compare the cases with distant outbreaks. You listen beside the narrow table while rain begins against the window, and the word virus acquires a weight that no ordinary medicine can lift. The room where Lana keeps her supplies is dim, with the shutters drawn against flies and the yellow afternoon glare. Glass bottles stand in uneven lines, the labels softened by damp fingers and repeated handling. A cloth basin contains water gone cloudy, and the smell of alcohol rests above the stronger odor of fever. Trina's notes are written on envelopes, account pages, and the backs of old maps. Ink is spread across some sentences where rain or perspiration touch the paper. Beyond the wall, the settlement remains quiet, except for a loose shutter tapping against its frame. You hear the faint movement of fabric when Lana crosses the room, and the careful clink of a spoon against a bottle. The air feels warm despite the weather, crowded with breath and the nervous heat of bodies. Every object seems temporary, yet the women arrange each one with the precision of a practiced ritual, Mark and Alec tell Trina what they found aboard the Borg, including the sealed cases, the ampoules, and the pilot's decision to destroy the aircraft. Their account gives shape to the fear already present in the empty houses. The novel presents the attackers as using humanitarian-looking aircraft as weapons, making rescue itself resemble an instrument of infection. You imagine the aircraft descending over other valleys, appearing with the clean lines of assistance before opening fire upon those gathered below. Lana studies the notes and says that the pattern may not remain stable. Trina adds that the virus may be mutating because the later symptoms no longer resemble the earliest cases. The group cannot determine whether the change is caused by time, treatment, or the bodies it has entered. Mark repeats the place name Asheville under his breath, as though geography might still provide protection. Late light enters through the cabin slats in thin bands, touching the dust without warming it. The floorboards have a dry, worn texture beneath your fingertips, and small grains of soil gather along the wall. A kettle cools on the stove, releasing a faint scent of iron and boiled herbs. Outside, the forest edge appears soft beneath the rain, while water runs from the roof in narrow threads. The windows reveal no aircraft, but the sky remains hidden behind layers of cloud and vapor. Somewhere in the distance, a branch breaks with a sound that could belong to a person or to a deer. The damaged Borg occupies your thoughts as a shape among the trees, its metal cooling slowly beside the spilled leaves. You feel the settlement narrowing around the surviving group, not through walls, but through the absence of every route towards help. Darnell develops signs of infection on the fourth evening, beginning with a headache that makes him press both hands against his temples. By midnight, his skin is hot and his speech has become uncertain, though he insists that he can still work. Trina examines him beneath the lantern and finds a faint rash along his neck, while Lana records his temperature on the back of a flower invoice. Darnell understands the danger before either woman can say it plainly. He asks Trina and Lana to confine him in the small storage room behind the common hall, where the door can be secured from outside. You carry a mattress across the floor, and Mark removes the shelves so that Darnell will have space to lie down. Alec fits a wooden bar through the brackets, while Toad brings water and a blanket. The request turns fear into a domestic duty, because locking away a friend becomes another task that must be completed with care. The confinement room has no proper window, only a narrow opening covered by woven cloth. Air enters carrying the smell of wet earth and old timber from the wall behind it. A lantern burns outside the door, leaving the interior dim enough for sleep, but not for comfort. Through the boards, you hear Darnell shifting on the mattress and breathing with increasing difficulty. The sounds are muffled, as though the room has been placed beneath water. Now and then, the wooden bar gives a small creak when someone leans against the door. A cup waits on the floor, its rim shining with condensation, while the blanket gathers dust where it touches the boards. In the corridor, Trina's footsteps pass and return, measured and quiet. The settlement continues around the confinement room, but every ordinary sound has acquired a second meaning, and every pause seems to contain a question. During the following day, Darnell becomes increasingly ill and begins hallucinating in the afternoon heat. He speaks about people standing beyond the wall, although the corridor is empty whenever you look through the doorway. At one point, he describes the Borgs hovering above a frozen harbor, their rotors turning without sound. Trina asks him to drink, but he answers as though someone else has spoken from beneath the floor. Lana keeps notes on his changing symptoms, recording the intervals of fever, confusion, and weakness. You hear him calling for his brother, then asking why the mountains have moved closer to the settlement. No consistent course can be traced through his illness, and each hour seems to alter the pattern again. The early deaths had suggested one kind of disease, while Darnell's hallucinations reveal a later form that resists the descriptions written in Trina's notes. Outside, The empty houses remain untouched beneath the afternoon sun. Dust moves through the hall whenever the door opens, settling on the shoulders of coats and along the edges of old photographs. A cracked mirror reflects the lantern as a small, trembling star. The corridor smells of vinegar, boiled cloth, and the faint sweetness of apples stored too long in a cellar. Beyond the confinement room, the common hall contains benches polished by years of use, though no one sits comfortably upon them now. You hear the softened scrape of a chair, the clink of a basin, and Darnell's voice reduced to fragments behind the boards. From the roof, rainwater falls into a barrel with a hollow, patient rhythm. The forest outside is darkening, and the last light has turned the windows the color of tarnished silver. Every sound remains close to the ground, as though the entire settlement is trying not to disturb the sick. Mark begins searching the remaining houses for people who may have survived unnoticed. You follow him through kitchens where food has hardened in bowls and bedrooms where blankets have been pushed aside. Alec checks the barns and sheds, discovering only tools, feathers, and one overturned wheelbarrow. Toad finds a handwritten list of names pinned beside the well, with several lines crossed out and others left unfinished. Misty carries water from the creek and leaves it outside the confinement room, although Darnell no longer recognizes her voice. Trina and Lana continue their work without certainty, separating clean cloth from used cloth and marking each bottle with the date. The settlement's routines return in smaller forms, shaped by fear and necessity. You sweep the common hall, bury the dead, and close empty doors against the weather. Beneath every task lies the knowledge that the virus has not finished moving through the houses. At dusk, the mountains become layers of charcoal beyond the fields. Mist gathers along the lower road, covering the tracks that lead away from the cabins. The abandoned belongings inside the houses remain untouched, including letters, combs, cooking pans, and shoes placed together beneath beds. A wind from the north carries the smell of wet leaves into the open hall. Somewhere above the settlement, a helicopter-like sound rises and fades, leaving everyone silent until the last vibration disappears. Lantern light trembles over the floor, and shadows lengthen beneath the benches. The old world seems to survive only as objects without owners, each one holding the outline of a person who has vanished. You stand beside the doorway and watch darkness occupy the spaces where people once moved. Asheville remains hidden beyond the ridges, and the valley keeps its secrets beneath the low cloud. Darnell's condition worsens through the night, and Trina asks you to help reinforce the bar across the door. He no longer speaks in complete thoughts, but his voice rises and falls as though he is answering a distant conversation. Lana places a basin near the mattress, while Mark carries away the water that has been spilled across the floor. Darnell says that the aircraft are carrying medicine, then accuses the walls of hiding the ammunition. His hallucinations turn the confinement room into a place where the crash, the Borgs, and the dead settlement appear together. You remain outside the door, listening to the muffled sounds from Darnell's confinement as they pass through the timber. Trina whispers that the illness may continue to change, and Lana writes another line beneath the previous observations. No one knows whether Darnell will survive the fever or what form the symptoms may take if he does. The night air presses coolly against your face whenever you step outside. Wet grass bends beneath the weight of water, and the path glistens faintly in the lantern glow. A moth circles the flame without touching it, while small frogs call from the ditch beside the garden. From the forest, the scent of pine returns, clean and deep after the stale air inside the cabins. The damaged aircraft is many miles away, cooling beneath the trees, yet its presence seems to remain in every metallic taste and every sudden vibration. A loose sheet of roofing taps irregularly above the common room. Behind the wall, Darnell's breathing rises into a rough cough and then falls into silence. You wait until the sound returns, counting the seconds without meaning to. The settlement lies beneath the mountains, surrounded by weather, darkness, and the uncertain future of an illness still changing. By morning, the group has accepted that the settlement cannot be treated as a temporary stop. Most of the people are dead, several have disappeared, and the surviving buildings contain more danger than shelter. Trina and Lana divide the medicines into smaller stores, placing one portion in the cellar and another in the eastern cabin. Mark proposes leaving the area once Darnell is stable, while Alec believes the mountains offer better protection than the roads. Toad and Misty gather preserved food, tools, blankets, and maps from the empty houses. You help carry the belongings through the cold morning, passing rooms where dust has settled over every surface. The settlement no longer resembles the community it was before the Borgs arrived. Its shared work has become preparation for departure, and its quiet routines have become methods of surviving one more day. Near Asheville, the survivors move carefully among the remains of their own refuge. Pale sunlight touches the wet roofs and turns the remaining windows into dull squares of gold. The garden leaves shine after rain, but the paths beneath them are crowded with mud and fallen branches. Empty houses hold the odors of extinguished fires, damp wool, and wooden floors rubbed smooth by many footsteps. At the well, a rope swings slightly, though no wind reaches the stones. The sound of water beneath the platform rises and disappears, steady as a heartbeat heard through a wall. You notice a cup left on a doorstep, a scarf caught in a hedge, and a pair of spectacles lying beside a chair. These objects have no voices, yet they make the absence of voices more distinct. Above the tree line, the cloud opens briefly to reveal a strip of quiet blue. The light is gentle, the air is cold, and the settlement waits beneath the mountains for decisions that cannot be postponed indefinitely. Darnell remains confined while the others prepare supplies and study the changing condition of the illness. He sleeps for several hours, then wakes speaking of a road that runs through the ceiling. Trina listens through the door and asks simple questions, while Lana measures his temperature and checks the rash along his neck. His answers drift between recognition and confusion, though he still knows Mark's name and asks whether the Borgs have returned. You hear the aircraft name repeated in the dark room, followed by long pauses and quiet breathing. The virus may have begun with the ammunition, yet its later behavior is difficult to distinguish from something newly formed within the body. Diagnosis remains almost impossible in the isolated settlement, where observation is the only instrument available. Mark writes the date on the wall beside the door, and Trina adds another line to her records beneath the words Asheville, North Carolina. The confinement room grows warmer as the day advances, even though the outer air remains cool. Dampness gathers along the lower boards, and the blanket gives off the faint smell of wool and fever. A lantern wick burns unevenly, creating a soft halo around the door latch. Water drops from the eaves outside and strike the ground with small, separated sounds. In the hall, cloth is folded, boxes are closed, and boots move over boards worn pale by use. Darnell's voice reaches you as a low murmur, softened by the timber until the words lose their edges. Now and then, he laughs at something no one else can see, and the sound fades quickly into coughing. You stand near the doorway with a cup in your hands, feeling its warmth pass slowly into your palms. Beyond the walls, the empty settlement rests under a sky without aircraft. Mark and Alec return to the question of the captured Borg, knowing that the wreck may contain records or equipment useful for understanding the attack. Trina warns that the aircraft and its ammunition may still be dangerous, even after the crash. Lana agrees that no one should approach the sealed cases without proper protection, though no proper protection exists. The choice remains between knowledge and exposure, and the group postpones the journey until Darnell's condition becomes clearer. Around you, everyone has begun to measure time by fever, silence, and the arrival of new symptoms. The first day after the attack had been filled with movement, while the later days had become a study of consequences. The Borgs had brought gunfire into the mountain valley, but the virus has continued traveling after the rotors disappeared. You look towards the forest and imagine the damaged aircraft cooling beneath the trees, holding its unanswered explanations in the dark. By evening, mist settles among the cabins and makes the settlement appear smaller than it is. The lanterns show only short distances, leaving the paths beyond them in soft grey darkness. Moisture beads on the door handles and darkens the grain of the fences. Somewhere in the woods, a branch falls with a deep wooden crack, followed by the faint scattering of leaves. The smell of rain returns, mixed with ash from the stove and the clean bitterness of crushed fern. Darnell's muffled breathing continues behind the confinement door, uneven but present. Mark sits beside the common room window, while Alec keeps watch near the eastern path. Trina and Lana work beneath a single lamp, their hands moving slowly over paper and glass. You remain among them as the mountain night gathers around the settlement, and the distant town of Asheville lies beyond the ridges like a memory. The survivors understand that cities have begun to empty, even if the phrase itself is never spoken aloud. Roads no longer promise assistance, aircraft no longer suggest rescue, and houses no longer mean that someone is waiting inside. Near Asheville, North Carolina, the group has learned that survival depends upon observing small changes before they become disasters. Mark, Trina, Alec, Lana, Toad, Misty, and Darnell remain connected by work, illness, and the careful boundaries of the settlement. The Borgs have passed from the sky, but their consequences remain in the dead, the missing, and the sealed ammunition cases hidden within the forest. Darnell sleeps behind the wooden bar, while the others sit quietly beyond the door. You listen to the house settling around you, to the rain beneath the eaves, and to the faint breath of the mountains. Nothing is resolved, yet the night continues, carrying the survivors gently towards another uncertain morning. Darnell's illness deepens during the days after the rain, and the wooden room becomes a place of quiet observation, guarded movement, and restrained fear. His fever rises and falls without pattern, leaving his skin alternately burning and cold beneath the blankets. At intervals, he wakes with a bewildered expression, as though the walls have shifted during sleep. Then, without warning, he rises and strikes his forehead against the plaster. The sound travels through the settlement with a dull, terrible rhythm. Mark reaches him first, while Alec holds the door and Trina gathers folded cloths from the table. The room smells of bandages, sweat, damp timber, and the medicinal bitterness of crushed leaves, steeped in hot water. A chair scrapes against the confinement room's floor whenever Darnell is moved from the wall. Its wooden legs complain over the boards, then settle into silence beneath the weight of anxious hands. Beyond the shutter, wet weeds bow beneath the rain, and water descends from the roof in narrow silver threads. Mark presses a folded bandage against Darnell's brow, while Trina murmurs steady words, though they have no power over the fever. Cold air enters through a crack in the frame, crossing their faces, before vanishing into the heavier warmth of the room. At first, the others speak of Darnell's behavior as an isolated consequence of exhaustion, infection, or the shock of the Borg attack. Such explanations become harder to maintain when the same signs appear in those who have remained near him. Darnell develops a fixed stare, a tremor in his hands, and a sudden violence directed against his own body. He cannot explain the pain, nor why the wall seems to draw him towards it. When Mark restrains him, Darnell apologizes in a voice that sounds almost ordinary. Later, he forgets the apology completely. The settlement divides itself around the room in practical circles. Trina brings water and clean cloths. Lana keeps the children away from the passage, and Alec checks the outer fence whenever the house grows too quiet. Mark records the hours of Darnell's fever on a scrap of paper, placing each mark beside a rough description of his breathing, speech, and strength. No doctor examines the page, and no laboratory waits beyond the mountains. The notes offer only the comfort of order, a small pattern drawn inside a widening darkness. Cold morning light reaches the confinement room through narrow spaces between the boards. It rests on the floor in pale strips, touching the chair, the basin, and the scattered threads pulled from a torn blanket. Darnell's breathing rises and falls behind the partition, sometimes deep and heavy, sometimes so faint that Trina leans towards the wall to hear it. Somewhere beneath the house, water moves through the soil. A crow calls once from the trees, and the sound is carried away by forest smoke drifting on a shifting wind. Darnell eventually loses the strength required to stand, but the illness continues to move through him with restless severity. His head bears several darkened wounds, and the muscles around his eyes remain tight even when he sleeps. Mark and Alec take turns holding his shoulders when the fever produces another confused struggle. Trina replaces the bandages, washing them in boiled water until the cloth becomes thin and grey. The group understands that the illness is not merely a fever, because it has altered Darnell's judgment, his movements, and the trust that once held the settlement together. On a morning without rain, Darnell stops answering questions. His eyes remain open, fixed upon the ceiling beams, while his breath becomes shallow and irregular. Mark places 2 fingers beside his throat and waits, counting slowly beneath his breath. Trina stands behind him with her hands folded against her coat. When Darnell dies from the illness and its effects, nobody announces the fact beyond the room. Alec closes the shutters, Lana carries the remaining water outside, and Mark sits beside the bed until the afternoon light has faded. Outside, the settlement grows still around the news. The path between the houses is soft with mud, and boots leave dark impressions beside the fence posts. Ashes from the previous evening's fire cling to the wet ground, while small weeds emerge between the stones near the storehouse. A kettle cools upon a flat rock, giving off a faint iron smell. From beyond the fence, voices call without certainty, asking whether the gate remains closed and whether anyone has seen movement among the trees. No one answers quickly. After Darnell's death, Misty develops a fever that begins with shivering and a dull ache behind her eyes. She tries to conceal the symptoms by working in the kitchen, where she lifts a pot from the fire and nearly drops it onto the floor. Trina notices the tremor, and Mark sees the same fixed concentration that preceded Darnell's first violent episode. Misty denies being ill, but her words come slowly, and she touches the side of her head as though listening to something beneath the bone. The confinement room receives Misty before nightfall. The chair scrapes across the floor again, though nobody comments on the sound. Mark places a water jar beside the bed. Trina lays fresh bandages upon a folded cloth, and Lana carries away the utensils Misty has used. The measures are improvised, incomplete, and surrounded by uncertainty. Nobody can state how the illness passes between bodies, how long it remains hidden, or whether the Borgs brought a single infection into Asheville or several related forms. Misty sits beside the wall with her knees drawn beneath a blanket, staring at the line where the boards meet the floor. Her sweat darkens the collar of her shirt, and the room carries the bitter smell of herbs, damp cloth, and old smoke. When she turns her head, the movement is delayed, as though her body receives instructions from a distant place. Outside, a branch taps the shutter in a slow, irregular pattern. The sound resembles a cautious hand, then becomes only a branch moving in the wind. Toad enters the room carrying a knife, saying that Misty has already begun to speak in the voice of the dead. Alec blocks the doorway and orders him to leave, but Toad does not look at him. His attention remains fixed on Misty, whose fever has made her whisper fragments of names and places. Mark steps between them, while Trina draws the chair against the inner side of the door. The settlement has no dependable police, hospital, or court system to protect it, and every decision rests upon frightened people with incomplete knowledge. Toad kills Misty before showing signs of the illness himself. The act happens quickly, leaving the room silent afterwards. Mark finds the knife on the floor. Alec forces Toad outside, and Trina kneels beside Misty without attempting to change what has happened. Toad insists that he prevented something worse, but his certainty cannot restore the person he has killed. The group now faces two dangers at once, one carried by the virus and another created by fear. A thin wind moves along the fence, carrying forest smoke from a distant fire. The smell settles over the houses with the dampness of burnt leaves. Inside the confinement room, the chair remains angled against the door, one leg resting upon a splintered board. A pale strip of light lies across the floor where the shutter does not quite meet the frame. Trina washes her hands until the skin reddens, and medicinal bitterness clings to the basin water. Beyond the fence, voices call from the dark, asking whether the sick have been contained. Toad begins to show signs before the next evening. His hands shake when he lifts a cup, and he develops the same distant expression that appeared in Darnell and Misty. Alec watches him from across the room, his face becoming less expressive with each passing hour. Misty's killing has removed the last certainty that violence can restore safety. Toad has become both witness and threat, and nobody can predict whether the illness will make him attack another person or himself. Alec takes his own life after Toad becomes infected. Mark finds him before dawn, beyond the shed where the ground slopes towards the trees. The discovery removes the group's strongest practical defender, the person who checked locks, counted ammunition, repaired the fence, and stood between fear and immediate violence. Trina covers him with a blanket while Lana remains beside the gate. Toad lies inside the house, feverish and guarded, unable to understand what Alec has done or why nobody speaks. Morning arrives beneath a colorless sky above the settlement. Frost gathers on the upper rails of the fence, while mud remains dark beneath them. A loose length of rope taps against a post, and the sound continues whenever the wind turns. In the kitchen, a cup stands beside a cold hearth, its rim marked by a faint brown stain. The air holds ashes, wet wool, and the sharp odor of boiled medicine. No one wants to enter the confinement room, yet everyone listens for Toad's breathing. Mark and Trina decide that remaining in Asheville will eventually bring the illness to every house. They leave with Lana, carrying packs containing maps, water, ammunition, and the few medical supplies that remain. The journey begins as an investigation, though it is also an escape. Mark and Alec had intended to investigate the attackers, but Alec's death changes the meaning of their departure. Now Mark must carry the unanswered questions without the man who once made difficult decisions seems simple. Before leaving, Mark studies the forest edge where the Borgs had passed through the sky. The hidden ammunition cases remain among the trees, sealed beneath branches and wet earth. He does not open them because the settlement cannot spare the sound or the risk. Instead, he turns towards the western road, where old signs point towards villages whose names have faded beneath moss. Trina walks beside him, and Lana follows with her rifle held close. The road away from Asheville descends between dark trunks and abandoned fields. Rainwater fills the wheel ruts, reflecting branches that tremble above the road. The three travelers move through the trees beneath coats that have absorbed smoke, sweat, and the smell of old campfires. Their boots sink into leaf mold, then rise with a soft tearing sound. Somewhere far beyond the ridge, a dog barks twice and stops. Wind carries forest smoke across the path, changing direction as they pass beneath the higher branches. Their silence is interrupted only by breath, footfall, and the occasional click of a weapon being checked. For 2 days, Mark and Trina search for signs of the attackers while moving between settlements emptied by the same violence. They find overturned vehicles, broken windows, and fields where crops have grown tall without harvesting. At one crossroads, a painted symbol marks a wall beside several dried stains. Mark copies the shape into his notebook, while Trina searches the surrounding houses for useful supplies. The investigation leads them away from any fixed route, because every abandoned place contains another fragment and another reason to continue. The group passes through an abandoned village on the third afternoon. Ashes lie in the street, and weeds grow through the collapsed paving around the square. A bell hangs crookedly in a small tower, moving whenever the wind enters through the broken roof. The houses have lost their doors, and loose paper gathers in the corners of rooms that no longer belong to anyone. Mark calls softly before entering each building. His voice travels through empty corridors and returns without an answer. Inside one house, a child's small footsteps cross the upper floor. The sound is light, hesitant, and unmistakably human. Lana raises her rifle, while Trina holds Mark's sleeve to prevent him from moving too quickly. A small face appears between the banisters, followed by a narrow shoulder and a hand gripping the rail. The girl descends one step at a time, pausing whenever the boards creak beneath her weight. Dust lies upon the stair, except where her footprints have disturbed it. Her name is Didi, and she says that she is 5 years old. She has remained in the village alone since her family disappeared during the attack months earlier. Her speech is careful but not confused, and she answers Mark's questions while standing beside an overturned table. Didi says the attack occurred before the smoke had settled into the rafters and before the weeds reached the windowsills. She remembers people arriving from the road, shouting about the Borgs and leaving bodies behind. Didi's face is pale beneath the grime, but her eyes are clear. A puncture mark associated with the Borg attack appears high upon her shoulder, partly hidden beneath a torn shirt. Trina cleans the wound with boiled water, finding that the skin around it is old and closed. Didi has no fever, no tremor, and no visible confusion. She has remained without symptoms for months, living among ashes and weeds while the village emptied around her. Mark writes the details down with particular care. The abandoned house carries the dry smell of dust, old grain, and damp plaster. A child's blanket lies folded beneath a window, stiff with dirt but still patterned with faded blue shapes. Didi's footsteps cross the floor in short, uneven intervals as she gathers a wooden cup and a small cloth rabbit. From the village street comes the scrape of a shutter moving against stone. Wind pushes ash beneath the threshold, where it gathers around the soles of their boots. Evening light settles upon the empty furniture like thin, pale dust. The survivors suspect that Didi is immune to the virus. The idea brings relief for only a brief time, because immunity may make her valuable to the wrong people. Mark considers whether her survival is caused by resistance, delayed illness, or an exposure unlike the one that killed Darnell and Misty. Trina reminds him that none of these possibilities can be tested. They possess no dependable hospital, functioning research center, or scientific evidence strong enough to guide a decision. They can protect Didi, but they cannot explain her. Mark and Trina give Didi a place between them during the night. Lana sleeps near the door with her rifle across her knees, while Mark keeps the notebook beneath his coat. Trina checks Didi's temperature with the back of her hand, though touch provides only a rough impression. The girl sleeps through the examination, breathing evenly beneath the blanket. Her small body seems peaceful, yet the puncture mark remains visible whenever the cloth shifts. Survival has become an uncertain form of evidence. Morning light reveals the village more clearly. Nettles fill the gardens, and pale seed heads bend over broken fences. Ash has collected in the mouths of wells and along the thresholds of houses where doors once opened onto busy streets. A rusted bicycle rests against a wall, its tires collapsed, and its handlebars wrapped in dead vine. Didi walks beside Trina, her small footsteps sounding against the stone. The absence of adult voices makes every ordinary sound seem unusually distinct. Mark, Lana, Trina, and Didi continue through a landscape of abandoned settlements. Mark checks the road ahead as Alec once did, and Lana counts the cartridges with the same careful rhythm. Trina carries Didi when the child grows tired, while Didi keeps the cloth rabbit pressed beneath her chin. Each village offers another ruined gate, another cold hearth, and another question about how far the illness has traveled. At dusk, they hear voices calling from beyond a settlement fence. The words are indistinct at first, rising and falling through the trees with a rehearsed cadence. Mark orders the others to remain behind the nearest wall. Trina draws Didi close, and Lana rests the rifle against her shoulder. The voices call again, asking whether the child is with them. Their knowledge of Didi suggests that someone has watched the road or followed the group from the abandoned village. The settlement beyond the fence appears occupied, though its buildings are scarred and its gardens have gone wild. Figures stand beneath a wooden arch, carrying lamps whose flames tremble in the evening air. Their clothing is patched with strips of cloth, and several faces bear the grey exhaustion of fever. Mark answers that the group is travelling west, but the voices ask only about Didi. Trina understands before Mark does that the child's immunity has become a story, and the story has already grown larger than the truth. Inside the abandoned barn where they shelter, straw presses against their coats and releases the smell of old animals. Wind moves through gaps in the boards, bringing forest smoke and the faint sweetness of crushed weeds. Didi sleeps with her head against Trina's side, while Lana watches the fence through a narrow opening. Beyond the buildings, the callers continue to speak in low voices. Their words are carried away and returned by the shifting air, sometimes sounding close enough to touch. The occupied community regards Didi as a demon. Its people believe that the puncture mark proves she was chosen by the attackers, and that a lack of symptoms shows supernatural corruption rather than resistance to infection. Their leader says that healthy children cannot survive what has destroyed entire villages unless something inhuman has sheltered them. Mark argues that Didi has a pulse, a feverless brow, and the ordinary needs of a frightened 5-year-old. The leader answers that these details make the danger more convincing. Trina keeps Didi behind the barn wall, while Mark and Lana speak with the community from a distance. They have no court to appeal to, no police force to separate accusation from punishment, and no hospital capable of proving what Didi is or is not. The group's safety depends upon distance, concealment, and the willingness of strangers to delay their certainty. Mark asks for water in exchange for ammunition, but the leader demands the child instead. The negotiation ends when one of the lamps is thrown across the fence. Flames spread through dry grass beside the settlement boundary. Smoke rolls low between the buildings, stinging the eyes and turning the moon into a blurred white disk. Didi coughs against Trina's coat, though the cough is caused by smoke rather than fever. Lana leads them through a gap behind the barn, where weeds reach above the child's shoulders. Mark follows with the notebook tucked beneath his shirt. Behind them, voices call from the fence, repeating that the demon must not be allowed to leave. They reach the forest before the fire has consumed the nearest house. Branches catch at their clothing, and ash settles upon Didi's hair like grey snow. Trina carries the child through a shallow stream, while Lana searches the darkness for movement along the bank. Mark hears the community shouting across the fields, then hears nothing except water passing over stones. The search for safety has become inseparable from the search for an explanation, because every answer they lack creates another person willing to punish them. Near dawn, the travelers stop beneath a stand of fir trees. Didi wakes and asks whether the people at the fence are still there. Trina tells her that the voices have faded, while Mark examines the puncture mark again in the weak light. The skin remains closed, and Didi's breathing is calm. Mark writes the date, the location, and the absence of symptoms beside the earlier observations. His notes cannot prove immunity, yet they may preserve a truth that fear would otherwise erase. The forest floor is cool and springy beneath their blankets. Droplets gather upon the needles overhead, falling at irregular intervals onto leaves, packs, and the metal of Lana's rifle. Smoke from the distant settlement drifts between the trunks, sometimes sharp and sometimes softened by mist. Dee Dee's small footsteps begin again when she wanders a short distance to examine a fallen cone. Trina calls her gently back, and the child returns with the quiet obedience of someone who has learned not to become separated from the living. Mark and Trina decide to keep moving west, away from the infected community and towards roads that may lead beyond the mountain settlements. They know that other groups may fear Dee Dee, and that some may seek her for reasons they cannot understand. The attackers remain unidentified, the Borgs remain unexplained, and the illness continues to pass through places that have lost their ordinary institutions. Still, the four travelers leave the trees together, carrying water, weapons, questions, and the fragile evidence of one healthy life. Ahead, another settlement appears beyond a ridge, its roofs dark beneath the morning haze. No smoke rises from its chimneys, and no bells or engines disturb the quiet. Mark lifts one hand, asking the others to stop before the road descends. Trina places Dee Dee behind her, while Lana studies the empty windows. From somewhere near the distant fence, a voice calls once, then pauses for an answer. The group remains motionless beneath the trees, listening to the uncertain world beyond. You remain beneath the trees while the distant voice fades into the settlement beyond the ridge. Mark keeps one hand raised, and Alec bends towards the earth, studying the thin impressions beside the road. The marks belong to several boots, all carrying the same narrow heel and deep tread, and they continue towards the silent houses. No one speaks until Alec finds a small metal clasp half buried beside the path. Its surface bears 3 dark letters, PFC, stamped beneath a circle divided by a line. The name gives shape to the men who have been following you, but it offers no comfort. Mark turns the clasp over in his fingers, while Dee Dee watches from behind Trina's coat. Around you, the morning haze rests heavily upon the fields, softening the fence posts and distant roofs. Frost clings to the dead grass in pale threads, and the air carries the faint scent of ash from some unseen fire. A crow moves along a branch above you, making the wood tremble without calling. Alex says that the attackers are organized, and Mark answers that organization is more dangerous than hunger. The group withdraws from the road and moves west through the trees, keeping below the ridge until the settlement disappears. The clasp passes from hand to hand, and its letters become a quiet center around which every suspicion gathers. PFC, Alec repeats, meaning Post-Flares Coalition, as though saying the full name might reveal its origin. He remembers hearing the phrase years earlier, in fragments from a battery radio that no longer exists. The forest closes around you with a patient, colorless stillness. Bare branches overlap above the path, and their small twigs scratch softly against one another when the wind passes. Beneath your boots, wet leaves give way to black soil, and the ground rises in long folds covered with moss. Charred trunks stand at the forest's western edge, their upper limbs broken and silvered by heat. A faint warmth reaches your face whenever the wind changes, although the flames remain hidden beyond the trees. Somewhere nearby, water falls over stones with a regular sound. By afternoon, Mark and Alec find a narrow track leading towards the burned section of forest. The road has been used recently, and the tire marks are too clean to belong to the settlement's abandoned vehicles. Alec believes the PFC has a base nearby, perhaps inside an old military depot or a research station left behind after the solar flares. Mark says nothing, because the name Katie McVoy has begun appearing in his thoughts without explanation. He sees a woman in a white room, though he cannot remember whether he has met her. The fire reveals itself at dusk, moving along the forest floor beneath a crown of smoke. Charred trees lean over the track like blackened pillars, their bark split into curled strips that glow faintly within. You feel the heat before you see the orange line, and fine ash settles upon your sleeves. Dry branches fall with dull cracks behind the advancing flames, while insects flee through the grass in trembling streams. The air tastes bitter, and each breath seems thinner than the last. Beyond the fire, a low metallic hum continues without interruption. Trina and Lana vanish during the confusion. Didi is gone with them, and the campsite contains only the torn edge of a blanket and one overturned cup. Mark finds Trina's scarf near the ash line, while Alec discovers footprints leading north towards a steep ravine. For several minutes, they search the smoke, calling the women's names, but the forest returns only broken echoes. Mark suspects that the PFC has taken them. Alec suspects that Trina and Lana have followed the attackers towards their base, perhaps believing that Didi can be protected there. The wind carries the fire sideways across the slope, and sparks rise like brief, red insects. Smoke turns the trees into pale silhouettes, while the ground beneath you pulses with distant heat. A fallen trunk burns from within, its hollow heart shining through narrow cracks. The fabric of your clothes holds the smell of soot, and your eyes water whenever the wind drops. Behind you, the campsite grows darker beneath the rising night. Ahead, the ravine opens between slabs of stone, where cold air climbs from the depths and brushes the warmth away. Mark refuses to leave the search until Alec points towards the northern track. The tracks divide near the ravine, with one set continuing along the ridge and another descending towards a concealed road. A torn strip of dark fabric hangs from a thorn, and a few drops of blood mark the pale stones beneath it. Mark recognizes Lana's coat, but Alec warns that the mark may have been placed to draw them forward. They continue nevertheless, because Didi remains the center of every pursuit, and the cult has not stopped looking for her. Night settles over the ravine with a weight that seems almost physical. The fire stains the low clouds copper, while the stars appear only in narrow openings between drifting smoke. Cold stone presses beneath your palms when you climb, and small fragments slide into the darkness below. The sound of the flames arrives muffled by distance, resembling slow breathing across the hills. From the hidden road comes a different noise, a measured vibration beneath the earth. Machinery is operating somewhere beneath the slope, concealed behind rock and dead vegetation. Near midnight, Alec finds an old service entrance built into the hillside. Its door is made from dark metal, and a narrow panel beside it carries the same divided circle as the clasp. The lock has been forced recently, perhaps by Trina and Lana, perhaps by those who took them. Mark studies the opening while the others remain among the trees. He says that if the PFC is inside, the site may contain food, medicine, and information. He does not say that it may also contain Didi. Cold metal corridors extend beneath the hillside, lit by weak strips of greenish light. Pipes pass overhead, sweating beads of water that gather and fall onto the floor. The low hum of concealed machinery moves through the walls, steady enough to enter your bones. Each footstep produces a small echo, softened by rubber flooring and heavy doors. Along one passage, old warning signs hang crookedly, their lettering faded beneath layers of dust. A smell of oil, paper, and stale disinfectant lingers in the narrow air. Mark and Alec enter the site through a storage chamber filled with empty cases. No guards appear, although a small camera turns above the doorway. Alec covers its lens with a strip of cloth, and Mark searches a cabinet containing paper records and maps. The room has no visible electricity, yet the lamps remain lit, and the air system continues to breathe. Among the documents, Mark finds the phrase Post-Flares Coalition written across a government memorandum dated 9 years earlier. The PFC was formed by several governments after the solar flares, when national borders had become difficult to defend. The pages feel dry and brittle beneath your fingers, as though they have absorbed the dust of many abandoned offices. Maps cover a long table, showing coastlines, migration corridors, ruined cities, and colored circles around surviving settlements. Several routes have been marked with red pencil, while others are crossed through in black ink. A brass lamp casts a narrow pool of light over handwritten notes. Somewhere behind the walls, a motor starts and stops, leaving the silence briefly larger. The paper smells faintly of mildew and old smoke. Further inside, Mark discovers a room with glass partitions and a row of sealed cabinets. Alec opens one cabinet using a key found beneath a ledger. Inside are laboratory reports, photographs, and a typed file bearing the name Katie McVoy. Mark reads the first page twice because the words appear to shift between readings. According to the record, Katie McVoy developed the virus known as the flare. Its stated purpose was population control, and the plan was intended to reduce the world's population by approximately half. The file describes a program designed to conserve planetary resources after years of ecological strain and political conflict. The planners believed that a smaller population could preserve water, soil, fuel, and food for those who remained. Their language is calm, mathematical, and almost tender in its concern for forests and reservoirs. Yet beneath the careful tables, you find lists of cities, projected losses, and acceptable levels of social disruption. Mark's hand rests on the cabinet while Alec reads over his shoulder. Neither man speaks when the report states that the first releases were authorized before the solar flares began. The laboratory remains strangely clean despite the ruin beyond its walls. Stainless steel surfaces catch the pale light, and narrow drains run along the floor beneath locked doors. Glass vials stand in trays, their labels marked with dates and coded initials. Ventilation moves through the ceiling with a dry whisper, carrying a faint chemical odor. Your reflection appears briefly in a dark observation window, thin and wavering beneath the corridor lights. The hum beneath the floor never stops, and the cold metal walls hold no trace of the forest fire outside. A second file explains that the virus has mutated beyond its original design. The flare was meant to act in predictable stages, but later strains affect memory, perception, and mental stability in ways the planners cannot control. Some infected people lose recent memories, while others confuse old scenes with present rooms. A few become violently protective of imagined commands, repeating phrases that originated in the earliest containment broadcasts. Mark recognizes several details from the infected cult, including their fixation upon Didi and their belief that she is necessary to humanity's future. The records use the word immunity more often than they use Didi's name. Blood from immune individuals may help identify the mutation, improve treatment, or create a more reliable strain. The cult's pursuit of Didi, therefore, becomes politically valuable and personally dangerous. Whoever controls her can claim access to a possible cure, a weapon, or proof that the PFC's original plan remains possible. Alec realizes that the attackers are not merely hunting survivors. They are collecting people, testing them, and removing anyone who resists. A ventilation grill trembles above you, sending a cool current across the corridor. The air carries the metallic scent of old machinery and the faint sweetness of something sealed in plastic. Dust lies in the corners where the cleaning system has failed, gathering around screws and cable joints. A red indicator blinks at long intervals beside a locked door. Behind it, an unseen pump makes a soft, rounded thudding sound. The floor remains perfectly level beneath your feet, unlike the broken ground and ash outside. The men hear voices beyond the laboratory and retreat into a records room. Through the narrow glass in the door, they see two PFC officers escorting Trina and Lana along the corridor. Dee walks between them, her wrists bound with flexible restraints, while the officers carry unfamiliar weapons against their chests. Mark begins to move towards the door, but Alec holds him back. A rescue attempt in the open corridor would bring the entire site upon them. They wait until the officers disappear, and Mark memorizes the direction of their passage. Wall map shows a hangar beneath the eastern ridge, connected to the site by a tunnel. Several aircraft are drawn beside it, each labeled Borg. According to the inventory, the PFC possesses advanced aircraft called Borgs, capable of crossing long distances above the storm systems that followed the flares. Another list records weapons called transverses, described in precise language as devices that evaporate molecules. Alec reads the line twice, then closes the file with care. The dry click of an unfamiliar weapon sounds from the corridor beyond. The corridor grows colder near the hangar access. Condensation beads along the handrails, and your breath appears briefly in the green light. Heavy doors stand at intervals, each fitted with small circular windows clouded by frost. From below comes the deep vibration of aircraft systems waking beneath the earth. A chain moves somewhere in the darkness, striking metal links together with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The smell of aviation fuel mingles with wet stone. Under the noise, paper rustles in a nearby office where no one seems to be working. Mark and Alec reach an observation gallery overlooking the underground hangar. Two Borgs rest upon raised platforms, their dark bodies smooth and narrow, with folded wings extending like the limbs of sleeping insects. Technicians move beneath them, carrying sealed containers and checking instruments. Near the far wall, Trina and Lana stand behind a transparent barrier with Dee. An officer speaks to them, but the glass turns his voice into a dull murmur. Mark sees Trina press one hand against the barrier, and Lana holds Dee close. A transversaire lies on a table below the gallery, surrounded by 3 armed guards. It resembles no rifle Mark has seen, consisting of a short black frame and a circular chamber that contains no visible ammunition. One guard lifts it to test the weight, and the weapon gives a dry click before he lowers it again. The file's description returns to you with unpleasant clarity. A transversaire evaporates molecules. Alec studies the device from the shadows, understanding that a weapon which removes matter would leave no ordinary wound. The hangar smells of cold steel, fuel vapor, and rubber warmed by machinery. Bright lamps shine upon the Borgs, revealing no windows and almost no seams along their bodies. A thin mist gathers beneath the platforms where cooling systems release their vapor. The ground carries every vibration into your legs, while distant fans turn with a soft, immense rhythm. Through the ceiling, the forest fire remains only a red reflection across concrete beams. No natural sound reaches this buried place. Alec finds a maintenance stair descending behind the gallery, and Mark follows him towards the holding rooms. Their progress depends upon darkness, silence, and the attention of guards drawn towards the aircraft. In a side office, they locate a keycard and another stack of records. One document describes the PFC's attempt to manage civilization through controlled settlements, selective evacuations, and medical observation. The program has become a system of experimentation and population control, although the original authors still call it preservation. Memory fragments arrive in Mark's mind like broken scenes. He sees Katie McVoy placing a vial beneath a lamp, then standing beside a man whose face remains hidden. He hears the word half-spoken in a room full of computers. A shoreline appears, followed by a red door and a child's hand against glass. The fragments vanish whenever he tries to hold them, leaving behind a pressure behind his eyes. Alec notices Mark leaning against the wall and asks whether he has been injured. The holding rooms are separated by thick glass and narrow observation panels. Lana lies upon a cot, while Trina sits beside Dee with her hands resting on her knees. A PFC medic stands outside their room, recording something on a paper chart. Mark uses the keycard, but the first reader rejects it. The second reader opens with a muted tone, and the door slides aside. Lana rises immediately, yet Trina hesitates, staring at Mark, as though she has seen him somewhere else. Beyond the holding rooms, the air feels warmer and carries the smell of antiseptic. Fluorescent tubes flicker above the ceiling panels, making every face seem briefly unfamiliar. Water drips behind one wall, and the sound travels along the corridor in small, hollow taps. A discarded blanket lies folded on a chair, its fibers rough beneath your hand. Somewhere in the site, an alarm begins to pulse at a low volume, neither urgent nor quiet. The machinery continues its hidden breathing beneath the floor. Trina tells Mark that the PFC took them from the campsite after the fire began. Lana says that Didi was the reason, but not the only reason. The officers believe Didi is immune, and they want samples from her blood before the mutation develops further. Alec asks whether the cult has reached the site, and the medic answers that several infected groups have been allowed through the outer perimeter. The PFC uses them as pressure against settlements, directing their pursuit of Didi whenever negotiations fail. Mark feels the corridor tilt, although the floor remains still. He remembers touching Didi's arm during the escape from the ruins, and he remembers the blood on his sleeve after the first attack. The memory does not fit with the next one, in which he is standing beside a frozen river. Alec asks what is wrong, and Mark says that he has already contracted the flare. For a moment, the others remain silent, while the low hum of the site settles around them like distant rain. The cold returns as the holding room door closes behind you. Condensation gathers on the glass, blurring the outlines of Trina, Lana, and Didi. Mark's face appears beside yours in the reflection, pale beneath the failing lights. His breathing is steady, yet his eyes keep moving towards corners where nothing stands. A paper chart slides from the medic's desk and lands face down upon the floor. The scent of disinfectant thins as a draft enters from the hangar, bringing fuel, dust, and the faint trace of smoke. They leave through a service passage while the PFC begins sealing the upper levels. Alec carries the files beneath his jacket, and Lana holds Didi's hand as they climb towards the forest. Trina remains quiet, but she repeatedly asks where the road is, although the question changes each time. Mark counts the steps, loses count, and finds himself beginning again at the same landing. He cannot tell whether minutes or hours pass before the group reaches the surface. Outside, the fire has crossed the ridge and entered the lower woods. Charred trees stand against the orange glow, their branches shedding sparks into a wind that smells of resin and scorched earth. Smoke drifts between the trunks, and the ground is warm in some places beneath the ash. The PFC site disappears behind a slope of black stones. Above you, something large passes through the clouds with almost no sound, perhaps one of the Borgs leaving the hidden hangar. By dawn, the group reaches an abandoned quarry beyond the burning forest. The files confirm what Mark and Alec have feared. The disaster was partly deliberate, and the solar flares provided both catastrophe and cover. The post-flares coalition emerged afterwards, intending to preserve enough infrastructure for a reduced population. Katie McVoy appears to have created the flare as the central instrument of that design, but the virus no longer obeys the program that produced it. The quarry walls hold the nights cold in layered bands of grey stone. Water gathers in shallow pools among broken machinery, reflecting the pale morning sky. Ash settles upon the surface in small, drifting flecks, while the fire makes a distant crackling beyond the ridge. A rusted crane turns slightly in the wind, its cable giving a strained metallic note. Around you, the survivors sit beneath a concrete overhang, surrounded by maps, paper records, and the smell of damp dust. Mark's illness advances through small betrayals. He forgets the name of the quarry, mistakes Alec for a stranger, and hears Katie McVoy speaking from behind the rock wall. Perception changes next, making the trees appear closer than they are, and the morning seem to brighten in sudden pulses. Mental stability becomes difficult to measure when each memory arrives without its proper place. He knows that the flare is moving through him, yet he cannot always remember discovering the fact. The infected cult continues to pursue Didi through the settlements beyond the ridge. Their voices carry across the burned slopes, repeating fragments of doctrine about immunity, sacrifice, and the restoration of order. The PFC watches from the air, using the cult's movement to identify hidden communities and resistant travelers. Every group that shelters Didi becomes a target, while every group that surrenders her receives medicine, fuel, or temporary protection. Her immunity makes her valuable to governments, cults, and frightened survivors alike. Trina begins to show the same early signs before the journey is finished. She loses track of conversations, describes places that are not present, and asks Lana whether the fire has already happened. Her hands tremble when she tries to draw the route across a paper map. Mark sees the future of his own condition reflected in her face, though he cannot decide whether the expression is fear or recognition. When the roads divide, her illness will have progressed, and the group will no longer know whom to trust. The quarry fills with a dim, colorless light as clouds gather above the forest. Wet stone gleams along the walls, and cold water runs through a narrow channel beneath the overhang. The ashes from the fire cling to every rough surface, turning the ground soft and grey. Somewhere beyond the quarry, machinery gives a low hum that may come from the PFC or from an abandoned pump. A distant bird calls once, then falls silent. Paper maps lift slightly in the draft before settling flat again. Mark understands that the journey has changed into a race against his own mind. The infected cult follows Didi, the PFC follows the cult, and the remaining communities close their gates against everyone. Alec wants to reach the coast, where a rumored settlement still uses medical records from before the flares. Lana believes the coast is already controlled. Trina cannot remember which direction they came from. Didi remains silent, holding the edge of Mark's sleeve while smoke passes over the quarry. A borg appears above the ridge, dark against the clouded sky, and circles once without descending. The aircraft's movement is almost graceful, though its presence turns every face upwards. Far below it, an unseen transversaire gives a dry click from somewhere among the trees. Mark pulls Didi beneath the concrete overhang, while Alex spreads the maps across the ground. The settlement beyond the quarry has gone quiet, and no smoke rises from its roofs. Around you, the engineered epidemic and the collapsing communities meet in the same narrow space. The survivors remain trapped between the PFC's design and the world that design has damaged. Behind them, the forest fire consumes the road towards the hidden site. Ahead, the cult moves through ruined villages in search of Didi, while the Borg waits above the clouds. Mark feels memory loosening inside him, and Trina sits beside him with the first signs of the same illness. Cold metal, burnt wood, paper maps, and concealed machinery belong to one continuous landscape now, and the morning offers no safe direction. You're carrying Didi through the broken edge of Asheville, where the streets have become narrow passages between ash, plaster, and abandoned vehicles. Mark walks beside you, though the name feels increasingly distant, as if it belongs to a life remembered through smoke. Trina keeps close, one hand resting against the wall whenever the ground trembles. Above the roofs, the Borg waits in the grey light, its engines turning with low mechanical patience. The three of you move towards it, because the PFC base in Alaska has become the last practical destination left. Didi's immunity has made her valuable to the PFC's research program, and that value has changed the meaning of every mile. She is no longer simply a child being protected from danger. She has become the possibility of understanding the flare and perhaps of preserving those who remain. Dust lies warm upon the pavement, although morning has scarcely settled over the town. The air above Asheville is hot and dry, carrying the bitter odor of burned timber, old petrol, and brick heated by yesterday's sun. Fine grit moves along the road in little streams, gathering beside doorways and broken gutters. Somewhere beyond the houses, metal knocks softly against metal whenever the wind passes through an empty workshop. The Borg's vibration reaches you through the soles of your boots before you reach the clearing, a steady tremor beneath the harsher noises of the ruined city. Dee Dee's fingers are small around yours, and her palm has the dusty warmth of a stone left beside a fire. Trina's breathing is uneven, while Mark listens to the houses, the alleys, and the distant cries that rise and fade without pattern. The flare has already spread through Asheville, although the news arrives without ceremony. A man collapses beside a fountain whose basin is filled with grey rainwater, and nobody goes near him. In a pharmacy, shelves have been emptied of medicines, while the shutters hang open and tap against the brick. A woman stares from an upstairs window, her face hollow with fever, then withdraws before Mark can call to her. The infected communities have not merely lost their numbers, they have lost the ordinary gestures that once joined one person to another. Doors remain barred against neighbors. Food is hidden beneath floorboards. The wounded are treated as threats because illness has made compassion dangerous. Dee Dee watches the streets in silence, and you feel the weight of her immunity gathering around her like an invisible document, carrying her towards the PFC base in Alaska. The Borg waits beyond a line of stripped trees, its dark body resting above the ground on a cushion of disturbed dust. You climb aboard with Dee Dee pressed against your chest, while Mark checks the rear compartment and Trina follows slowly behind. Alec is already in the pilot's seat, his hands moving over the controls with the careful economy of someone who has flown too often through a collapsing world. The craft rises over the infected area, and the streets fall away beneath you. Asheville spreads below as a pattern of smoke, roofs, and open wounds, with figures moving through the intersections like fragments of a dream. The Borg's vibration passes through the floorboards and into your knees. Its engines lift you from the ground, but they cannot lift the flare from the town beneath you. Within the aircraft, the light is thin and colorless, filtered through scratched panels and narrow windows. Dust trembles on the floor with every change in the engines, forming delicate lines that vanish whenever someone steps across them. The metal seats hold the night's cold, while the cabin gradually fills with the warmer smells of oil, canvas, and human breath. Dee Dee sleeps against Trina for a short while, her head moving gently with the Borg's motion. Outside, the sky has the washed-out blue of a winter morning, though the air below remains hot and dusty above the besieged town. The vibration beneath you becomes almost reassuring, like the pulse of some enormous machine carrying everyone towards a place that might still be intact. Mark closes his eyes, and memory loosens behind them. The flight does not carry you far before the Borg is forced down near an old house beyond the northern road. The attack comes from the trees, from windows, and from a collapsed porch where several infected figures have hidden among the boards. Alec turns the craft sharply, and the landing gear strikes the earth with a sound like a heavy door thrown open. You run with Dee Dee while Mark covers the path behind you, and Trina disappears through the side entrance. The attackers follow until the house swallows the sound of their footsteps. Inside, you find Trina standing in a narrow hallway, one hand against the wallpaper, her face pale beneath the dust. Mark reaches for her, and she looks at him as though his face belongs to someone she once knew but cannot quite name. The old house is silent in a manner that seems deeper than the absence of people. A clock has stopped above the mantel, its hands fixed at 3:15, while a curtain lifts and settles over a cracked window. The rooms retain the faint smells of damp wood, old cooking, and the dry sweetness of unopened books. Somewhere beneath the floor, a pipe ticks at long intervals as it cools. Dust covers the staircase in an unbroken layer, except for the marks made by your boots and the narrow trail of someone who came before you. Trina's voice is fading when she speaks, each word searching for a familiar face in the dimness. Mark stands close enough to touch her, yet the silence between them feels wider than the house. Trina has the flair. You understand this before she says it, because her eyes do not settle properly on Mark, and her hands tremble whenever the room grows quiet. She remembers fragments: a road, a fire, a boy beside a wall, and the sound of Mark's voice beneath the Borg's engines. His name reaches her only briefly, like a word written in dust before the wind takes it away. Mark kneels in front of her and tells her they have been searching for one another, but the explanation falls through the gaps in her memory. Dee watches from behind you, still and alert, while the old house holds every breath. The disease has entered the person Mark meant to protect, and the future seems to narrow around that fact. The attack returns before the house can become a refuge. A window breaks in the kitchen, and glass scatters across the floor in bright pieces. Another figure climbs through the frame, followed by two more, their clothing torn and their faces altered by hunger, fever, and rage. Alec calls from outside that the Borg is ready, while Mark pulls Trina towards the back door. You lift Dee beneath one arm and cross the garden as the infected spill through the rooms behind you. Dry weeds brush your legs, carrying the sharp scent of crushed stems. Trina stumbles once, then catches herself against Mark's shoulder. Together, you escape the old house and reach the Borg, leaving behind the silence that had briefly allowed memory to speak. The garden has become a pale field beneath the afternoon sun, with broken chairs lying among the weeds and a rusted swing moving without a child. Heat presses against your face as you cross the open ground, while the house behind you fills with footsteps and splintering wood. The Borg's ramp is cold beneath your hands, and the vibration of its engines rises through the metal as Alec increases the power. Dee's hair lifts in the artificial wind, brushing your cheek with a dry softness. Trina leans against the doorway, breathing with difficulty, and Mark looks at her as though he can preserve her by looking carefully enough. Above the trees, smoke drifts in long horizontal bands, blurring the horizon where Asheville has already begun to disappear. Mark decides that Dee must reach the PFC base in Alaska, even if nobody else can make the journey. The decision settles over the cabin with the weight of something final. The PFC may have created systems that damage the world, but its research program still possesses the laboratories, records, and instruments needed to study Dee's immunity. Somewhere in Alaska, a base may remain hidden beyond the reach of the infected communities. Mark says that Dee cannot stay among the ruins because every settlement now carries the same danger. Trina hears the words without fully understanding them, and Alec keeps his eyes upon the instruments. The plan is no longer to save everyone. It is to move one immune child through a collapsing world. Within the Borg, the air becomes warm and stale as the engines settle into their long rhythm. The floor trembles beneath you with a vibration that passes through the seat, the straps, and the bones of your feet. A red lamp flickers above the rear hatch, casting a narrow glow across the cabin walls. Outside, clouds drift below the aircraft in pale layers, while the land shows through occasional gaps as a brown and black pattern of roads, fields, and smoke. Trina rests her head against the window, leaving a faint mark upon the glass. Mark studies a paper map, folded so often that its creases have become white. Dee sleeps near his knee, wrapped in a coat that smells of rain, dust, and old wool. The route towards Alaska changes when Alec tells you about the flat trans. The transport device is located inside a secure PFC building in Asheville, a place designed to move people and equipment beyond the ordinary distances of the ruined world. The flat trans can carry the survivors towards the PFC's northern network, but the building is now surrounded by the infected. If the Borg lands there, The infected may follow through the transport chamber and spread into whatever remains beyond Asheville. Alec studies the map, then the darkened town beneath the clouds, and describes another possibility. He agrees to crash the Borg into the flat trans building. The crash would trap the infected in Asheville and destroy the transport device, preventing pursuit through the PFC system. The idea of the flat trans seems strangely cold against the heat rising from the town. You imagine the secure PFC building beneath you, with its reinforced walls, sealed doors, and corridors that once carried the quiet confidence of a government plan. Inside, the chamber would be lined with cold metal, polished beneath white lights and untouched by the dust outside. Its machinery would hum at a pitch different from the Borg's deeper vibration, creating a second rhythm within the first. The transport device would stand at the center of that chamber, flat and silent, waiting to fold distance into a single passage. Around it, the ruined town would press closer, filling the streets with fever, smoke, and footsteps. Alec explains that the crash must be deliberate, and Mark understands what such a choice will cost. The Borg will not survive the impact, and the people aboard it may not survive either. Yet if the flat trans remains intact, the infected can reach the PFC base in Alaska, following the only path that still connects Asheville to the hidden research network. The plan therefore becomes a final exchange. One aircraft, one transport device, and the lives gathered inside them, traded for the possibility that Dee Dee will escape. Mark agrees because Dee Dee's immunity has become the last practical hope, although that hope belongs to an institution that helped bring the crisis into being. Trina looks at him and seems to recognize the shape of his sorrow. The Borg descends through a veil of smoke, and Asheville rises beneath its shadow. Buildings stand in irregular clusters, many with their roofs removed and their windows dark. Roads are blocked by overturned buses, burned trucks, and abandoned barricades. The hot, dusty air above the besieged town turns the sunlight copper, while small fires glow in courtyards and alleyways. You see movement among the streets, but distance makes every figure uncertain. Some people run towards shelter, while others look upward and remain motionless. Dee Dee is strapped securely against you, and Mark checks the fastening twice. Trina sits opposite him, her eyes closed. Alec brings the Borg lower, towards the secure PFC building and the flat trans hidden beneath its reinforced structure. Inside the cabin, every object seems to have acquired a separate sound. A buckle clicks against its housing, a loose panel taps behind the wall, and the control instruments give soft electronic pulses. The Borg's vibration changes as Alec alters the angle of descent, becoming heavier through the floor and sharper in the metal frame. Cold air enters through a narrow seam, touching your face before disappearing into the warmer cabin. Mark's hand rests on Dee Dee's shoulder, while Trina's fingers move uncertainly across the edge of her seat. Her expression changes whenever she looks at him, passing from fear to confusion and then to a small, exhausted curiosity. The fading voice within her is trying to recognize a familiar face before the aircraft reaches the ground. The secure PFC building appears through the smoke, a low structure of concrete, steel, and dark glass. Its outer walls have been scarred by gunfire, but the central section remains standing. In the streets around it, infected people gather beneath awnings and beside burned vehicles, turning towards the sound of the Borg. Alec opens the rear hatch, and hot air floods the cabin with the smell of dust and ash. Mark carries Dee Dee towards the exit while you hold the strap across her chest. The flat trans lies below, beneath the building's central chamber, and there is no time to reach it on foot. Alec keeps the Borg aligned with the structure. The aircraft becomes a descending weight, aimed at the last doorway between Asheville and Alaska. Trina opens her eyes as the building fills the window. For a moment, she looks directly at Mark, and the confusion leaves her face. She says his name with the tired certainty of someone returning briefly from a great distance. Mark leans towards her, and the aircraft shudders as Alec begins the final approach. The memory lasts only a little while, but it is enough to restore the shape of the years they shared. Trina remembers the road, the forest, the fire, and the old house where his face had seemed unfamiliar. Her voice remains quiet beneath the engines. Then the Borg strikes the outer wall, and the world becomes a violent brightness of metal, stone, fire, and broken glass. Heat fills the cabin in a single breath, followed by a pressure that drives you against the restraints. Fire rolls beneath the aircraft, illuminating the floor in orange waves, while pieces of the secure PFC building fall through the smoke. The Borg's vibration disappears beneath the impact, replaced by tearing metal and the deep collapse of concrete. You hold Didi as tightly as the straps allow, and the smell of burning fuel overwhelms every other scent. Trina's face is turned towards Mark, still carrying the final trace of recognition. Alec remains at the controls until the chamber disappears beneath the wreckage. The Borg crashes into the flat trans building, killing the people aboard it and destroying the transport device below. After the impact, the building settles into a silence broken only by fire. The flat trans chamber has been crushed beneath the aircraft, its cold metal walls twisted around the machinery. The device is no longer capable of opening a passage to Alaska, and the route through Asheville has ended in a mass of burning wreckage. Outside, the infected gather at the perimeter but cannot pass through the collapsed structure. Smoke moves across the town, covering the streets where the flare has already spread. Didi remains alive within the wreckage, although the story of how she survives belongs to the narrow margin between design and accident. Mark, Trina, and Alec are gone, and the last human choice made in Asheville has become part of the PFC's larger record. Ash drifts down through the broken chamber, settling upon beams, cables, and fragments of glass. The cold metal around the flat trans has lost its smoothness, carrying blackened edges where the fire passed over it. Small flames burn along a cable beneath the collapsed floor, producing a faint blue light before dying among the dust. Heat remains trapped beneath the concrete, while the upper rooms grow gradually cooler as evening approaches. Beyond the building, the town gives back only muffled sounds, a distant shout, the fall of masonry, and the occasional scrape of someone searching through the ruins. The air tastes of soot and scorched oil. Under the wreckage, the transport device is reduced to broken surfaces, and the secure PFC building no longer offers any passage beyond Asheville. The years move quietly after the crash. The world does not heal, although its wounds become covered by new roads, new offices, and new names for old intentions. Authorities associated with Wicked begin gathering information about immunity, infection, memory, and the effects of prolonged exposure to fear. 2 years later, far from Asheville, an immune boy called Stephen sleeps beside his mother. She holds him close when the authorities arrive, but the officials carry documents, equipment, and the calm confidence of people acting under a plan. They take Stephen from her arms because his immunity has become valuable to the machinery forming around the crisis. The room where Stephen is taken is quiet, with pale walls and a single covered lamp beside the bed. His mother's voice follows him into the corridor, growing softer as the doors close between them. The authorities speak in low tones, their shoes making measured sounds across the polished floor. No fire burns there, and no aircraft trembles beneath the ceiling, yet the same cold purpose has entered the room. Stephen's name is written on a file, crossed through, and replaced with another. From that moment, the immune boy called Stephen is renamed Thomas. The new name is clean, official, and detached from the woman who first spoke the old one. A soft light rests upon the corridor windows, showing only a pale reflection of the people who pass them. The air smells of disinfectant, paper, and metal warmed by hidden machinery. Somewhere behind a sealed door, Instruments give regular electronic beeps, while ventilation moves through the ceiling with a low, continuous murmur. Stephen sits beneath a blanket too large for him, holding one corner between his fingers. He cannot understand the documents, the uniforms, or the reason his mother's voice has become distant. Outside, the authorities associated with Wicked continue their work, arranging rooms, schedules, names, and tests around one immune child. Stephen's removal becomes connected to Dee Dee's immunity through records assembled after the Asheville crash. Dee Dee had shown that the flare could leave one child untouched, and Stephen becomes another piece of evidence in the same expanding archive. The PFC's research program, the Flat Trans, the Destroyed City, and Wicked Later Authority belong to a single institutional history. The personal struggle to carry Dee Dee towards Alaska becomes the beginning of an experiment designed to measure what fear, memory, and confinement can do to immune children. The names change, the buildings change, and the plans acquire new language, but the purpose remains recognizable. A child's survival is transformed into a system of observation. In the quiet of that later world, corridors replace forests, sealed rooms replace ruined houses, and observation tables replace the vibrating floor of the Borg. The scent of burnt wood gives way to polished steel, while distant engines are replaced by ventilation fans and electric locks. Yet memory still lingers in material traces. A folded map in an archive, a damaged report from Asheville, a photograph of a child, and a reference to the Flat Trans building destroyed in the final crash. Cold metal surrounds the new experiments just as it once surrounded the transport chamber. Beneath the orderly surfaces, the old crisis continues to move, carrying Dee Dee's immunity and Stephen's removal towards the later Maze Runner experiments. The final meaning of the story lies not in the survival of a single plan, because the attempt to reach Alaska fails with the destruction of the Flat Trans. It lies in the way failure is collected, studied, and turned into another design. The Borg crashes, the people aboard it die, Asheville remains sealed beneath fire and wreckage, and the infected are prevented from following the transport route. Mark's decision gives Dee Dee a chance, but the institution that values her immunity continues beyond him. Stephen is taken from his mother, renamed Thomas, and placed inside the machinery that will eventually produce the maze. Personal sacrifice becomes data, grief becomes procedure, and the crisis becomes the beginning of a larger institutional experiment. Night settles across the distant ruins, although no darkness can conceal the plan continuing through the years. In the old house, dust would still rest upon the staircase, and the stopped clock would still mark 3:15. In Asheville, the secure PFC building would remain broken around the destroyed Flat Trans, with fire-blackened metal beneath fallen concrete. Far away, the Borg's wreckage would cool among the walls, its engines silent beneath ash and stone. The fading voice that tried to recognize a familiar face has vanished, but its final memory remains within the record. Trina briefly remembered Mark, and then the crash carried them both into history. The air over the ruined town grows cooler after sunset, drawing the heat from the pavement and broken walls. Ash settles in the weeds, on abandoned vehicles, and across the remains of the road leading north. Somewhere beneath the wreckage, metal contracts with small, distant sounds, as if the building is slowly releasing the day's violence. No Flat Trans opens in the dark chamber, and no Borg rises above the roofs. The transport device has been destroyed, the infected have been trapped in Asheville, and Dee Dee's immunity has passed into the hands of people who will build another future around it. The last aircraft is gone, but the government plan continues quietly beyond the fire and the night.